And we are back. Irish Breakdown Nation, IB Nation, we're back. That's right. I'm Brian. It's Friday. And you know what Friday means? It used to mean mailbag time, but now it means it's prediction time. We're going to still do a mailbag afterwards, but it's prediction time, Ryan. And we have spent all week breaking down Notre Dame and Stanford. And so today we're going to talk about what's at stake in this game for Notre Dame and Stanford as well. We're going to talk about what our predictions are, how we see the game playing out, hand out our game balls. We're going to do that on we're not going to repeat a lot of the stuff we've talked about during the week, which we have done in past weeks, just to kind of put it all into one show. We're going to focus on the predictions because, honestly, if I'm being honest, it's because we want to get to the previews and predictions of the other games this weekend. This is going to be such a phenomenal weekend of college football. It really is. Now, unfortunately, I won't be able to watch a lot of it, but I'm going to be I know what I'm doing on Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, right? And so we're going to have a lot to discuss here today. We're going to preview several games: Penn State, Michigan, Alabama, Tennessee, Oklahoma State, TCU, USC, Utah, Florida, LSU are just a taste of what we're going to discuss today. But, of course, Ryan, at the beginning, it's Notre Dame and Stanford. And we'll do mailbag at the end, so if you have questions or super chats, throw those suckers in there, and we will definitely get to them. Y'all know that. Notre Dame, Stanford time, Ryan.
Yep.
This is a rivalry game. We can debate how strong of a rival, if it would be a rivalry by our terms, but in the traditional sense of the word, it is a rivalry. There's a trophy at stake, right? And I can't remember which one. I think it's like is it the Jules Shalala? I forget what the
Shillelagh?
Yes, I forget which. It's one of those things that's at stake for this game. You can tell how serious I am about this rivalry that I don't even remember what it's called. But I'm going to have to find it here. What they call the thing that they have. It's the
someone just said Legends Trophy.
Legends Trophy. Yeah.
Let's go with
that. It's a Dublin Irish crystal ball resting on a California redwood base. I'm reading that from Wikipedia.
Ooh.
So anyway, that's what's at stake in this particular rivalry. It's been one that Notre Dame has they got a 21-13 advantage. Stanford actually is 7-12, or excuse me, 7-5 over Notre Dame in the last last 12 matchups. But Notre Dame has won the last 3, and that came after Stanford had won 3 straight games. So when you look at what is at stake in this game, Ryan, there's sort of 2022 stuff at stake, and then there's a big picture thing. And when I talk big picture first, Ryan, with this game is I know the Jules Shalala is the USC. I know I'm an idiot. I'm sorry, guys. But I knew some West Coast school that I actually cared about, not this one. But I think the big picture one first, Ryan, is really brief. Notre Dame has a shot to kind of just sort of put a nail into Stanford's coffin from it being a rivalry. And when I mean rivalry, I don't mean between the two teams, but kids just aren't going to Stanford over Notre Dame anymore. And that was really what was happening during the Jim Harbaugh and early parts of David Shaw. Is not only did they beat Notre Dame on the field, they were beating Notre Dame on the recruiting trail consistently for big-time kids. It's not really happening anymore, and I think this is the kind of game where if Stanford can pull off an upset, all of a sudden, maybe they can have a little bit of glimmer of hope because they're trying to salvage their season. But I think when you just look at it from a rivalry standpoint, I think this is kind of if they beat Stanford and if they beat Stanford the way that they should, that's now 4 straight blowouts. I think it's no longer a competitive thing, and you're now looking at Stanford as being on the same level as a Duke and a Northwestern when it comes to recruiting against Notre Dame.
Exactly. Yeah. They've been kind of the trendy team for a little bit there, right? I mean, we talked about a lot of the guys that had chose Notre Dame in the past, the Thomas Bookers of the world, and working further back, obviously there was a lot more guys that had chosen Stanford at one point over Notre Dame. And it just hasn't been that way, Brian, to your point, over the last couple of years. I mean, Notre Dame just took a kid from Stanford this 2023 cycle in Armel Mukam, right? So it's just something where Notre Dame has definitely distanced themselves, but I agree. It could be a nail in the coffin, right? Like, let's call it like that. They can completely separate themselves, and they are by far the high academic institution that also plays, a high level of football, which it always should be at the University of Notre Dame. So I think that's the separator, man. And then also over encompassing is that you're a much better team than Stanford, much more talented team than Stanford. Like, you don't mess around and make this a contest, make this a game, make us come up with we won't come up with excuses, but make others come up with excuses after the game of why it was too close at the end, right? Put the nail in the coffin, foot on the throat, whatever wording that you want to use for this one. Notre Dame is a much more talented team than Stanford, and it has to show on Saturday to show that there is growth here.
Short term, I think that's the big picture here for this game for Notre Dame, right? It's the growth. And I saw someone in the chat saying they have a hard time seeing Notre Dame winning this by 10 because they haven't shown the ability to dominate games. I disagree. I think they have shown the ability to dominate games. I think they haven't shown the ability to finish those dominant games off. They did beat North Carolina by 13 on the road. North Carolina is a significantly better football team than Stanford.
Yes.
Beat BYU last week by 8. Again, it's a game if we've talked about it, you stop them on 3rd and 17, that's a 20-something point victory. At what point does it become, if you do this, that happens, right? There's got to come a point in time where we've got to stop having the conversation of, well, if they would have done this, if they would have done that, they'd have won by X number of points.
Right.
It's time to say, okay, yeah, you did it, right? And I think that's the thing that's at stake is it's a momentum building game. It's a statement game of saying, hey, look, yeah, we're not happy about what we did the first 2 weeks, but we're not that team anymore because we're and I'm saying this as well. I mean, I did my Irish breakdown top 25. I think some of the AP and coaching votes last week were just stupid. You're going to have BYU at 4-2 over, significantly higher votes than Notre Dame after Notre Dame just completely outplayed them for 57 minutes and won the game on a neutral field. Baylor's ahead of them. Why? You know what I mean? And
Baylor just lost to West Virginia last night.
Right, but this was before. This is before that.
Yeah.
But to your point, I mean, Baylor's not that good. And Notre Dame lost to Marshall. And my answer was, well, but who did they beat though? Right, but it's that stigma of the Marshall loss is still there. I think if you can go out there and just dominate Stanford, then you can. We're now a month past the Marshall game. They've now won 4 straight games in a row, all against Power 5 teams or about to be a Power 5 team because BYU's about to be one. Next year they joined the Big 12. They were a ranked opponent. You say, hey guys, that's in the rear view, right? Yeah, it's impacted our season clearly, but it's in the rear view. And I think a close game over Stanford makes you think like, are they really that much better than the team that barely beat Cal? I don't think you can make that case if it's a 7 to 8 point win that you let Stanford hang around. Because this is not a good football team. It's a team with some talent, but there's a difference between having some talent at spots and being good, and they're not a good football team. So if they can do what they're supposed to do to a team like that, Ryan, then we can look at this team and say, okay, they're ascending. Then you build on it with UNLV next week. Then you have a lot of confidence going into Syracuse the following week. Now, all of a sudden, if you're able to run that table, now all of a sudden you're 6-2. You've won 6 in a row. You're playing great football, and here comes top 5 Clemson. So I think that's what's at stake for Notre Dame in this game is keep rolling. As you said the other day, Ryan, don't slip up. And slipping up isn't just about losing. That's an obvious slip up, but it's also about lose the momentum, develop bad habits that a team can an undisciplined team that lacks leadership can develop bad habits where they don't play well against teams that they know they're going to smash or think they should smash. And so they don't put them away the way they should because they don't have the leadership, the maturity as a football program, a football team to handle their business the right way. Does this team have that? We're going to find that out on Saturday. Because the reason the last 2 teams were able to battle back is because they're good teams. And Notre Dame made mistakes. Stanford's not a good team. And so you need to treat them like a team that's not very good. And you're a team that is good and knows you're good and knows you have a mission in front of you and they are standing in your way. And that's how you treat teams like Stanford. If Notre Dame can have that mentality, then I think they can win this game convincingly. If they don't, then it's going to look a lot like the Cal game and the BYU game where, an inferior opponent was allowed to hang around longer than they should have.
Yeah. Brian, we talked about it yesterday, right? A key is obviously to start fast because we have known throughout this entire season, if you look at Stanford, they have not been a second half team, man. Like they have just fizzled down the stretch of football games. So get on them early. and then let them fizzle, man. Let them be who they are. That's like the main thing for me, right? You want to play Notre Dame football, but also make Stanford play exactly the way they've been playing, man. Like, don't let them have a get-right game. Don't let it get to that point, right? So, yes, it is a situation where you know that Notre Dame's more talented. Notre Dame has been trending upward the last couple weeks. They've had exponential growth consistently over the last 3 weeks, if we're being honest, right? So having that exponential growth needs to continue. Look, you started out the season 0-2. We've talked about this a ton, right? You are at rock bottom after you lose against Marshall. From there, though, it would have been very easy for Notre Dame to quit, right? And it would have been very easy to lose the locker room. It would have been very easy for all these players to just kind of mail it in a little bit. The fact of the matter is that they're playing hard, right? They're playing tough football. And Notre Dame has responded, right? Like, you cannot sit here and say that Notre Dame has not had urgency over the last couple weeks and played better and shown resilience, right? But this is the next step in resilience, is to blow out a team that you should blow out, right? Don't make them a better team than they are. Make it a statement game if you're Notre Dame. This game should not be close. And we'll get into our predictions. I think we're both on the same wavelength in the sense that, like, hey, talent-wise, this game isn't close at all. Notre Dame needs to have a killer instinct. They need to put their foot on the throat, and they need to end this football game early. Do that, and we'll be talking Saturday nights with a lot of optimism moving forward.
Right. That's what we haven't seen from this team yet. That's the one. I mean, we've seen that the offense can be really good when it wants to be. We've seen the defense can be really good when it's played smart. We've seen that they can go on the road and beat a good football team. They can go on a neutral field and beat a good football team. What we haven't seen is two things, Ryan. Can you blow out a team that you're supposed to blow out and play like you are a legit top 10 team, right? They're not a top 10 team from a ranking standpoint. If you beat Stanford, you're not a top 10 team anyway because of your resume is not top 10. But they are a top 10 team in my opinion. They are a top 10 team that hasn't played like it. They have the top 10. Look, their roster to me is still one of the 10 best in the country, in my opinion. It flat out still is, right? Now, has everybody played to their potential, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? We're not saying that. We're not saying they should be a top 10 team, but they are a top 10 team from a talent standpoint. Go play like it, right? And that's what USC did in 2016, which is why I've compared this team to that team. By the end of the season, nobody wanted to play USC. Had 3 losses.
Yeah,
Blowout loss to Alabama, double-digit loss to Stanford, loss to Utah, right? They were not a good football team early, but they became a really good football team. And that's what we need to see from Notre Dame. And how do you play at home? Notre Dame has not played well at home in front of their home state. And that is a thing. That is a thing about a program that, you're at home, and Marcus Freeman said it before the BYU. Look, right now we are kind of playing better away from home because it's less distractions and all that other kind of stuff. Well, you're going to have to learn to not be distracted at home and figure out how to play well at home because you got a couple pretty good teams coming to your home place here over the next couple months. So that's going to be a big part of it too, Ryan. So before we move on to our predictions, Ryan, I do want to wish a happy birthday to our guy, Tommy Guns. Tommy Guns 44. It's his birthday. So Tommy actually put a super chat up because he wanted to see if we can sing to him. I love you, buddy, but not that much. So I'm sorry, Tommy.
Tommy, I will do one better for you, Tommy. My daughter is now, I don't know, I guess it's a daycare thing, but Juliet is singing happy birthday to everyone, even when it's not their birthday right now. So I'll tell you what, I'm going to do this for you, sir, because you're a valued member of this
He is
community.
An OG of Irish Breakdown. He is an OG.
Tommy, you're an OG even before me, sir. So I will promise you that at some point over the weekend, there will be a message on the board or a post on the message board, boards@irishbreakdown.com, by the way, from Juliet singing happy birthday to Tommy. Guaranteed.
Yes. Yes. And the video that you did with Farida with Juliet was still made my wife cry. So she's very good at those. Very good at those. So Ryan, let's dive into the prediction of Notre Dame and Stanford. We are going to talk about how we're going to give our score prediction, how we see the game playing out, and then hand out our game balls as we kind of put a bow on this part of the show. So I'll let you start, Mr. Roberts. What is your prediction? How do you see the game playing out, and then I'll ask you about the game balls after you're done with those things. So let's get it started, baby. Let's do it.
I mean, there should be no surprise to this prediction, right? I've talked about it all week. There's no reason that Notre Dame, this can't be the game where you finally say, hey, you were much better than a football team. You dominated from start to finish, and you made a little bit of a statement, right? So I have Notre Dame 42-17. Brian, I think that Notre Dame's going to jump on them early, and they're just going to kind of control the pace of the football game for the majority, right? I still think that there will be a couple touchdowns scored because at the end of the day, there are talented offensive players on Stanford's side, right? We've talked about Elijah Higgins. We talked about Michael Wilson. We've talked about Ben Urisak. Obviously, Tanner McKee is a very talented quarterback, so they're going to get a couple, man. But for me, Notre Dame dominates this one start to finish, 42-17. This one's a no doubter. Like, this isn't one where you score a couple touchdowns in the fourth quarter to really distance it. Like, this one is one, I believe, where Notre Dame is just dominant from start to finish, put the finishing touches, and then you go into next week feeling great about yourself.
I mean, they got to be due for it, right? I mean, that's just kind of how these things normally go, right? I mean, they've got to be due for that kind of game. I mean, even teams that I'm trying to think, like, was it Notre Dame 2003? This is the game I kind of compared it. This game I compared it to is, 2003 Notre Dame finished 5-7, but they were 4-6 at the time when they headed out to play Stanford, who was, again, also not very good that year. Finished 4-7 under Buddy Tevens, and Notre Dame beat them 57-7. Right? Even bad teams have those days where just, okay, this is the day that it clicked for us. And so, Ryan, I'm with you. I think that's how it's going to go as well. I went 52-13, and now I said in my prediction, that's not the margin that I think these teams are. And so there's a lot of factors of why I went 52-13, which is a huge blowout prediction. Like, that's the kind of prediction you make when they're playing like Bowling Green or New Mexico or something like that. But here's why I went there. This is a bad matchup for Stanford. And that's a part of football. It's a bad matchup for Stanford. It's an offense. Like, we've seen this defensive line and what they do to bad offensive lines before, and it's not pretty. And those teams had mobile quarterbacks. This one doesn't. I think that on the other side of the ball, Notre Dame matches up very well against Stanford. And I just kind of see it being a game where Notre Dame jumps up early, like you said. We actually see this game very similarly. We both have Stanford scoring 3 times. You just have it being 2 touchdowns and a field goal. I have it being a touchdown and 2 field goals, right? So we're very similar there. I just think it's one of those games, Ryan, where Notre Dame kind of pours it on after they get up and Stanford just kind of wilts, because we've seen this from Stanford, right? We saw this last year where, they compete for a while, but then they just wear down. And this is a team that's beat up. They're injured. They've played 4 hard games in a row. They're traveling across country from West Coast to, Eastern Standard Time, now the very edge of Eastern Standard Time, but, going across 3 time zones. And it's a bad matchup. And so I just think it's going to kind of steamroll a little bit more than you would normally predict based on the on-paper matchup. That's kind of where I'm coming from. And I see the backup offense kind of punching one in late is kind of how I see this game going out. So I really don't see it a whole lot different than you. 45-13 with the backup offense punching one in at the end is kind of how I see it. So I do think this is a game that Notre Dame should dominate. It's a game that I think that when you look at it, Ryan, it's a game, Coleman Smith and I are on absolutely the same page, and it's a game that you should control. And if Notre Dame can't control this one, then we're going to have a very interesting, concerning conversation after the show. But I think they do. And you know who I think is going to have a really big game, or a game where I'm like, okay, now this is what I thought we were going to be. I just have a feeling that this is going to be one of those games where, like, okay, this is what we expected to see a Tommy Rees-led offense look like. This is what we thought we were going to see at the beginning of the season. And I think that's part of it too is, I think Coach Rees has caught a lot of flack, rightfully so, justifiable flack, I should say. He's a competitive dude, right? I mean, he is. And I just kind of feel like this is that game where you're going to see this offense come out, have a really good game plan, a really aggressive game plan. They're going to put Stanford away. And I just don't see it being a really competitive game at all. And so, I mean, look, they beat Stanford 45-14 last year at Stanford. And I don't think Notre Dame even really played that well that game, to be completely honest with you. They just out-talented Stanford. And I see the same thing happening in this game as well.
I love it. Was that a game ball being thrown to Tommy Rees? That's
what
it sounded like
no. Right? Game balls go to players. Game balls go to players. But speaking of, Ryan, let's do our game balls. Who, offense and defense, who do you have the game balls going to if the game plays out the way that you think it's going to play out?
I think it's Drew Pine this week for offense. Last week I gave it to Lorenzo. That did not turn out too great in that prediction. I think that what you have seen now from Drew Pine for back-to-back weeks has given you a lot of confidence that he's going to continue to grow, continue to get better. And if Notre Dame's going to score 42 points, I think that they are going to open it up a little bit more than usual, right? Like, I know Notre Dame's going to be able to run the football in this contest, but you want to continue to see the evolution of the passing game, getting wide receivers more involved, continuing to do the Michael Mayer things that have made you successful, continuing to use the running backs when you want to in the passing game as well. So I think Drew Pine has a big game offensively. That's what the first game ball is going to go to. Second game ball, Brian, you're going to love this one. I think that this is, because we've seen him now start a couple times in recent weeks, but I think this is the Benjamin Morrison game, sir. Couple interceptions for the freshman. Maybe he takes one back to the house. I don't know yet, but regardless, we've seen Stanford be a turnover-prone team. Benjamin Morrison with a couple interceptions in this one.
I'd love to see that. I mean, obviously, I think he's a heck of a player. I honestly, I'm going to give my game balls, and then I'm going to talk about how if I'm close to being right on the game ball, then it could end up with you being right. Mm-hmm. So offensively, I'm going to go with Chris Tyree. We talked during a show yesterday during the keys to the game that Notre Dame has a speed advantage. So I just kind of am picking a guy that has speed. I think they're going to rip off some big runs in this game. I could have easily gone with Lorenzo Styles or Braden Lindsey, but I went with Chris Tyree because I think this is the game where they hit one. I've seen several running backs be this close to have ripping off long runs against Stanford's defense. And, like the kid from Washington who was at Virginia last year, he's a 4.7, 4.6 guy, right? I mean, Chris Tyree is going to have some big holes to run through. I think that we're going to see him catch a big pass for a big gain, something. I think Chris Tyree is going to have some big time plays in this game. So I'm going with him. And then defensively, I'm going with Isaiah Foskey. I think Foskey's going to have a Jerry Tillery type of game. Somebody said this the other day in one of the chats, and it really stuck with me. And it's like, yeah, you know what? I could see this. And if you remember correctly, in 2018, in that matchup of two top 10 teams, Jerry Tillery had something like 4 sacks in that game.
That's what propelled him to first round status,
right?
Brian. That was that game.
Exactly. And he did it against Nate Herbig. I mean, he had a couple of them against Nate Herbig, who at the time was still considered a big time prospect. It's before he just had completely had his ability. You remember how good he was during his career before all the injuries set in for Stanford? He was so good before all the injuries took over. It's really unfortunate because I enjoyed actually watching him play.
He's actually Nate Herbig's turned himself into a pretty solid contributor for the Eagles, though. He's kind of a rotational player, so
that's good. Yeah. That's good. So I see it being Foskey, but if Foskey doesn't win the game ball, but he's very disruptive, then that means the game ball is going to go to some DB that takes advantage of the pressure. And I could have easily, like, if we're doing runners up for game balls, as I said, pick Styles or Lindsey, one of the two burner receivers. I think this is the game. I hope this could be more wishful thinking on my part than anything, Ryan. Mm-hmm. But I kind of feel like, look, Tommy Rees is a smart guy. He's a smart guy. He has to understand that they can't be this team for the rest of the way, right? Like they can't be this team that just like to beat Clemson and USC. I don't think he thinks that. I hope he doesn't think that. It would surprise me if he thought that. And I think he understands we got to get our receivers involved. And this is a great game for it. Like, this is the game for it. This next 2 weeks before you go into Syracuse, because here's the deal, Ryan. If your receivers don't have some momentum going into Syracuse, that's probably not going to be the game where they break out. You know what I mean? Against that secondary. So you got a couple weeks to really get them rolling. This is the perfect matchup for them. Jet sweeps, reverses to Braden, screens, crosses, climbs, post routes, double moves, stuff like that, where you're getting them on the run and getting them opportunities in isolations. I think he's going to do that. I think that's going to roll. I think the run game is going to look good early, which is then going to set up even more because Stanford's got to start triggering their safeties more. So I could pick one of those two speedy receivers. And then my second runner-up for defense was Jason Adamiola. And I could, those two just really having a big game. And if that's true and they both play really well, then I could see a situation kind of like Wisconsin last year where, Cam Hart steps in front of a couple, balls and gets a couple picks. And, and like you said, Benjamin could be one where he even steps in front of one and, maybe takes it back a little bit. So that would be fun to see. That'd be really fun to see, Ryan. I would enjoy that thoroughly.
I wouldn't mind it. I wouldn't mind it also being maybe a Brandon Joseph real breakout, right?
Yeah.
Because we've seen some moments, like he had a forced fumble last week, he had a great game week 1, but he's been pretty quiet the last 4 games, right?
Yeah.
So if Notre Dame can get a big performance out of Brandon Joseph, maybe he's the guy that steps in front of one. Maybe he's a guy that forces another fumble near the line of scrimmage and it goes back for a touchdown, or it just go, you flip the opposition there. I think that it could be a big game for Brandon Joseph. Regardless, though, I think one thing that you said is that I feel like someone in the secondary is going to get a big boost from the pass rush, right? Like I think that there's going to be a couple opportunities to create big plays because we've talked about it a ton. Tanner McKee is not a very mobile quarterback. He's going to get forced into some bad mistakes if there's pressure, and their offensive line is hurting with injuries right now, and it wasn't playing that great even when it wasn't. So I think pass rush is also going to have a big day. I just think that there's going to be somebody in the secondary that has this humongous game because Tanner McKee is forced into a lot of mistakes.
Yep. That's how I see it playing out. I think this is going to be a convincing win for Notre Dame. So we're going to get into the other Week 7 big game predictions next. If you're listening via podcast, you can find those on the CFB Nation channel. So make sure that you are subscribed to the CFB Nation channel, where you can get Ryan and I's predictions for a preview and predict for this week's big games. We will also do a mailbag. We've already got a bunch of them starred. Some of them are predictions like John Kristofic having Notre Dame 34-17. We brought up a lot of other ones. Kirk Roberts, Notre Dame 45-17. So we have a lot of those as well, but we also have some questions. We're going to answer a bunch of those afterwards. There's some recruiting questions, a lot of stuff going on there. Also, if you're listening to this podcast and the game, it's not Saturday yet. If you're in town, either for the game or you live in town, you're going to want to be on campus over by the Golden Dome around 3 to 3:15 on Saturday, because we are going to go live. Irish Breakdown is going to go live at 3:30. We're going to have a big special announcement. We're going to have some special guests. It's going to be a really, really, really fun day, and you're not going to want to miss the live show, and you're not going to want to miss being there if you're able to. I promise you're going to want to be there for that. So if you have any questions about it, hit me up on Twitter. Follow me on Twitter, obviously, Coach D178, but you can hit me up, or if you're a member of the Irish Breakdown message boards, I'm going to put some stuff on the message boards about that. You can also send me DM, and you can also email me at brian@irishbreakdown.com. So I try to make my email as easy as possible for people to get to. So that's obviously that one. But got a lot going on. It's going to be a lot of fun. So definitely check that out. Hit the like button, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and share this podcast. So, Ryan, let's dive into Week 7 games. This is this has been one of the more entertaining college football seasons so far, and there's 2 reasons why. There haven't been a lot of matchups each week. There's been a lot of bad games each week, but there's always like at least 3 or 4 really interesting matchups every week so far. And there's been some big games every week. The other thing is I'm not a fan of parity, but like for parity's sake, like I don't like making rules for parity, but I like when parity happens because some teams are ascending while maybe another team is kind of coming down. What I hate is when you just start tearing down the good teams, but you look at like the SEC, there's ascending teams in that conference. The ACC, there's ascending teams in that conference. The Big 12, ascending teams in that conference. Pac-12, same situation. And it's made for a very entertaining year so far. It really has. And then, Georgia almost loses to Missouri. Alabama almost loses to Texas A&M, who's not very good. It's been a very entertaining week, but this week is just loaded with big-time matchups, Ryan. Loaded with big-time matchups. And so I'm really looking forward to this weekend of college football. This is one of those weekends, and you're kind of like right in the middle of the year where people's fates are kind of determined this weekend. There's going to be some contenders that are no longer contenders, some teams that maybe people aren't certain of, that, wow, this game makes you realize this team is legit. This is going to be a fun weekend of college football, Ryan.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be like it starts to be the separation as portion of the schedule, right? Like as we get into October and then into November, that's when teams really distance themselves, or they kind of, solidify themselves as contenders or pretenders. Like this is where we are in the schedule, Brian. So to your point, a lot of great games, couple rivalries this week, still some teams that have surprised, TCU still sitting there undefeated after their big win against Kansas. Like there's been a lot of really cool storylines, man. Like you think about just Kansas TCU last week and what those teams have done so far. You've seen Alabama obviously be a very up and down team, a little more down than maybe typically they have been, and Bryce Young being injured. And there's been a lot of storylines, which has been really fun. But that's the beauty of of college football, man, is that I feel like there's so many just wonderful things that have been like worthy of watching, right? Like there's just been so many great storylines, players emerging, teams disappointing. There's always something to talk about when you're talking about college football, which to your parity perspective is that it's not forced parity. Like there's just a lot of uncertainty this year, right? Like we thought we wanted to crown, not us personally, but people wanted to crown Georgia as they're going to win the national championship again. And then they have a couple clunkers in a row where you're like, maybe they also have their warts to them as well. So it's going to be an interesting season.
Same with Bama. Bama's played two good teams this year. They've played two good teams this year. They beat one of them by a point, and their starting quarterback got knocked out, and they beat the other one by 4 points, and their starting quarterback got knocked out. That one is not as big of a deal about the quarterback being hurt because A&M went with the guy who started the season, and B, Bama didn't have their quarterback.
Did you see? We haven't talked about this, but did you see Jimbo Fisher's comments after the game last week?
No,
where
I ignored Jimbo. What did he say?
He said something, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he said, he was proud of his team, all that good stuff, coach talk. And he said, we're playing with our backup quarterback. And I'm just thinking, Jimbo,
I did see that.
Quarterback to start the year.
Somebody tweeted that. He's like, yes, I did see that. Somebody was like, dude, you named him your starter at the beginning of the year.
Right.
Like, that's not exactly your backup quarterback. You know what I mean?
It's not an excuse, man. It's not an excuse.
So lame. He's such a I can't stand that guy. Cannot stand that guy. Oh my gosh, he's ridiculous. The point, however, is that it's been outside of Ohio State, and their closest game was what? The 11-point win over Notre Dame. That was a competitive game for 3.5 quarters. The top teams have all played close games. Clemson had to go to overtime to beat Wake Forest. Alabama's had to hang on and win close games. Georgia's had to come back and win games. Everybody's having a battle, and it's made the year fun. And it's like I said, look, as Alabama and Georgia as good as they were in the past years? No, they're not. At least not right now. But they're not on upset alert this weekend against Tennessee just because they're descending. It's also because Tennessee's a lot better now. Yes. Right. And so that's what I like about it. Why is TCU ascending? Well, they made a coaching change. They've had some things, and they're doing it with their backup quarterback, right? Because their starting quarterback got hurt like early in the first game of the year, and they started Max Duggan, a guy that started the last 2 years. So it's kind of funny when people are like, Sonny Dykes is, look what he's doing, Max Duggan. I'm like, dude, he should have started him to begin with, but that's a different conversation for a different day. But it's made for a really, really fun in this weekend's games. And honestly, Ryan, in the Big Ten, especially, there's a big game we're going to talk about here in a second, but there's been some teams that have played really soft schedules, and I don't know who they are. I really don't know who they are yet. So this is kind of like the weekend where we start to find out, okay, who are you really? Yep. And those are going to be a lot of the games we're going to preview. Ryan, I want to begin with we're going to kind of go for the first few games, kind of the big games. We're going to go just sort of chronological order of when they kick off. And the first big game of the day that we're going to discuss is a noon kickoff on Fox. It is number 10 Penn State at number 5 Michigan. Michigan is a 7-point favorite in this game, Ryan. And this is one of those games that I was just kind of discussing here a little bit ago where I don't really know what either of these teams are. And if I'm going to be honest, I feel like I know a lot more about Penn State than I do Michigan, because at least Penn State's been challenged a couple times, sort of. With all due respect, playing at Auburn is a lot tougher than playing home against Indiana or home against Maryland, right? Or Hawaii, Colorado State, or UConn, the other powerhouses that Michigan has played this year. And certainly a tougher test than playing Iowa, who is got one of the worst offenses I've ever seen. Penn State at least has played Purdue on the road. Purdue's 4-2, and they're a fourth quarter choke against Penn State away from being 5-1 in the top 20. If we're being honest, if they would have won that game, they did go on the road to play Auburn, so at least they've played in a hostile-ish environment. Even though Auburn's not that good, but even then, it's like I'm breaking down the game and I'm looking at the statistical matchup, and I'm sitting there saying like, okay, man, Michigan lost some big time players off of their defense, but man, they've got the number 7 rush defense in the country again. That's pretty good. And then you dive into the numbers and you look at who they played. The UConn has the best rushing attack that Michigan has played this year, ranking number 40. Maryland's at number 66. Hawaii is 98th. Indiana's 124th. Iowa's 127th. And Colorado State's 129th. Like, oh, okay, that makes sense. boy, hey, Penn State should rush on them because Penn State's like in the top 30 in rushing offense. And then you're like, oh, okay. They've played the number 68 rush defense in the country, the 92nd, the 99th, and the 102nd. They've played one good rush defense all year. That was Purdue, who's ranked 18th. And guess what? Penn State had 98 yards in that game. Having said that, they didn't play Nicholas Singleton a bunch in that game. They didn't really start using him a lot more till the Auburn game. Is that really why? Or is it that they're just not really that great either and they've beat up on bad teams? And that's what makes this matchup intriguing, Ryan, is I don't think we really know a lot about either one of these teams. I doubted Penn State early at Auburn. I picked Auburn to win that game. I was way off. So they've at least shown me they can play better than I think they're capable of playing. It really made this game a lot harder to predict because there's just so many unknowns about what these two teams are.
Yeah, and so Brian, it's really funny though, like where these teams bread or buttered is kind of similar though, right? I mean, you mentioned it already. Both teams have tremendous run defenses. And again, it's not against the greatest competition at this point, but both teams are letting up less than 3 yards a carry right now, right? So Penn State has done a good job stopping the run against who they've played. Michigan has done a good job stopping the run. And then on the other side, I mean, you mentioned it, right? Nicholas Singleton is a dude. He is a dude. Whether it is a little bit of smoke and mirrors, we will find out against a better Michigan defense. But Singleton's really good. Their other freshman, Katron Allen's a pretty darn good football player as well. So they got a couple of nice players. And then shout out to Blake Corum on Michigan's side, man. That dude is a good running back. So you have two teams that want to run the football, have run the football well, and have stopped the run at a very high level so far. So for me, Brian, like one has to give, right? Something's got to give in this football game because they both match up well against what the other team does well.
So ultimately, best, yeah.
Exactly. So ultimately, I think Penn State runs the ball a little bit better this game than Michigan does, just slightly. And I think the biggest difference is that we have not seen up to this point Michigan willing to let J.J. McCarthy loose a little bit, right? Like we haven't seen that. So I am going to defer, even though I'm not the biggest Sean Clifford fan, but the 6-year senior has been there, done that, right? Like he's played a lot of football games. He's won a lot of football games. So I think that he's just not going to make the bad mistake in a bad moment. I think there's more of a chance that McCarthy makes the rough decision in a bad time than a guy like a Sean Clifford does, right? So I have Penn State 24-20 in a very close, highly contested football game that is built off of running the ball.
I like everything you just said. I think that makes this matchup very intriguing, Ryan. There's no question about it. There's a few things that I look at as well. Number one, did you name 2 freshman running backs for Penn State that are playing? Or did that rule pass? That you can
and they're both pretty good, man. Okay. Yeah, they got their stuff approved and they're good to go.
And they're a great compliment. I mean, that's what you got to do when you sign 2 backs in one class. You got to get guys to kind of bring a little something to the table. And I thought that was a great signing. The Penn State offensive line has been their issue in recent years. Coach Troutwine was kind of hired to fix that. He had some really good, lines at I think BC, and there was a guy that played at Florida back under Urban Meyer, and you kind of expected him to kind of do well there. Really struggled his first 2 years. I think this is year 3 for him, I believe. Correct. I expected last year's line to get better. They didn't get better. I blamed kind of 2020 on COVID and just not being able to work with those guys and all that. They didn't get better last year. So far, they've played a lot better this year. We're going to find out this weekend if it's because they haven't played very good teams or if it's because he's getting them rolling. We're going to definitely find that out because, no, this is not last year's defensive line for Michigan, but it's still a good defensive line. I think this year they're more interior dominant than they were last year where they were edge dominant, I believe. When I look at this matchup, there's a couple reasons I went back and forth on it, but I settled on Michigan. And I'm going in my prediction for this game is Michigan winning 27-23. Agree with you that it will be hotly contested. Number one, the home team usually wins this matchup. That's just how it's gone. The home team normally wins. However, this is the first time I'm trying to see where I put this in my article yesterday, Ryan. This is the first time since 1997, the last time Michigan won a national championship, that these two teams have both been in the top 10 when they've played. Can you believe that? Like, there's been some really great games, but it's one team would be outside of the top 10. I thought it would not have gone back that far, but 1997 was the last time they both were top 10 coming into this game. So a little better team, right? Both of the teams are a little bit better. So obviously the road team will have a better chance to win in that instance. But Michigan being at home matters. I think this is the game where Harbaugh lets JJ loose a little bit because I think he knows he needs to. And the final thing for me is I really like Penn State's skill this year. They have a very underrated receiving core. I just think Michigan's is a little bit better. And I think there's the dynamic ability of the quarterback. I think the running back's kind of a wash. I think the offensive line of what we've seen so far is a bit of a wash. But when it came down to it is who has the better matchups on the perimeter. And I just like Michigan's matchups against Penn State a little bit more. I know Joey Porter Jr. is a very good player. It's the other matchups that I think present some problems. We saw Purdue move the ball pretty effectively in those ways against Michigan or against Penn State. So I just feel like Michigan's skill, Cornelius Johnson, Andrew Anthony, Ronnie Bell, they just have a lot of weapons on. Roman Wilson's had a big play this year. I think is Eric. I'm not. I'd have to check. I forgot to check before if Eric All is going to be back. I don't think he's back yet, but if he's back, he helps them out a ton. But I don't anticipate him being a big factor even if he is back. But the point is,
their backup tight end's done a pretty good job too.
Yes, and they've got Donovan Edwards is coming along. Yeah, Donovan Edwards is coming along as the number 2 running back. So that's really what did it for me. The home game combined with I just like their skill a little bit better than Penn State's. Having said that, if Penn State pulls off the upset. You talked a lot about the running backs. I think for Penn State to pull off the upset, their receivers are going to have to make plays. It's going to have to be, Parker Washington making a big play. It's going to have to be Lambert making a big play. And, I really like Michigan's tight ends. But you know who else has really good tight ends? Penn State. They've got pretty good tight ends as well. They're getting healthier. So if they're going to pull off the upset, yeah, you're going to need Singleton and Allen to play well. But I think what it's going to come down to is Sean Clifford makes some really heady plays, and one of the skill players makes a play, whether it's Brenton Strange at tight end, like he's the guy that made the huge play at the end of the Purdue game, right? That won that game for him, or if it's Parker Washington or, as I said, Lambert. So I think it's going to have to be one of the complementary pass game pieces that is going to be the reason that they win. I just don't see them going into the big house and just running enough on Michigan to pull the upset. I think they can run enough to make Michigan maybe trigger a little bit, and then you get some shots down the field. So I think that'll have to be the factor. And then, of course, Michigan turnovers. But I think Michigan plays a relatively clean game. And I just think being home and having a little bit better skill talent is the reason I'm going with the Wolverines in this one, Ryan. So if your prediction is wrong, if your prediction is wrong, what will be the reason? And then I'll do the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I defer to your point of like, hey, if this is the game where J.J. McCarthy kind of gets the leash taken off a little bit, or at least kind of loosened a little bit, he's a dynamic athlete, right? Like, he's a dynamic athlete that has a lot of talent. If he's able to make some plays, because, Brian, I do have some concerns over the overall secondary of Penn State. I mean, you mentioned Joey Porter. I know they have I think a sophomore that's playing okay football at the other cornerback spot. Can't remember his name. But I don't think that this is the pass rush you're usually seeing at Penn State. I don't think the secondary as a whole is great after losing a couple of really talented players like Jaquan Brisker last year and Tariq Castro Field. So I think if J.J. McCarthy is able to have kind of a breakout game and their wide receivers get involved, I think that's the biggest difference, right? Because I think that he's kind of the X factor. We've seen some solid signs from him, but again, he just hasn't been asked to do a ton. He's a really talented player. If the leash gets taken off, then I think if the Michigan passing attack kind of takes me off guard a little bit, I think that's the separator for Michigan if they're able to get the win.
And the opposite is true for me. If Michigan doesn't win, it's because I'm not right on them letting J.J. McCarthy loose. Because if you're going to try to do what you've done in recent games, Penn State is good enough in the front seven, in my opinion, to slow down Blake Corum enough to win. You're not going to shut down the run game, but you're going to slow it down if you're not willing to let your quarterback loose a little bit. Right. And so if they still try to play the conservative football we've seen in recent games where they've let the Indiana game was much closer than the final score. The Maryland game was competitive. Iowa had chances late in the game to get back in that. Right. And so if you were just doing that because you were playing inferior teams, I don't like it, but I get it. If you're in a situation where that's just who you think you are, then A, you should have left Cade McNamara at quarterback. B, it's just you're only going to go so far because you don't have last year's defense to be able to win those games for you. So if I'm wrong and they don't let JJ loose a little bit with some shot, I mean, use his arm, throw some bombs off play action, let him get out on the perimeter where if Penn State doesn't respect the bootleg, he can take off and run that sucker because he's really athletic. So I just want to see more of that from Michigan. And if they don't do that, then that could be the window that Penn State needs to make some stops to then create some opportunities in the pass game, because neither team has a great secondary this year. Neither of them do. And so if you let and here's the other thing, if you let Penn State hang around, then obviously that gives them more confidence in their ability to go on the road and win, because they've done it before. And they've got 2 Power 5 road wins this year. And so they're not afraid of going on the road and competing and battling. So that's how I see that one playing out. Next up in our breakdown is number 3. This to me is the biggest game of the weekend, in my opinion. Number 3, Alabama plays at number 6, Tennessee. It is a 3:30 game on CBS, which makes it even better because now we get to listen to the CBS intro music as the game gets ready to get started. Alabama is a 7-point favorite. Ryan, this is Tennessee, honestly, the biggest concern I had about making my prediction this week is because Tennessee is the trendy pick. And that's usually not the games that go well for you. You don't want to be the team that's the trendy pick against Bama because you don't want Bama ticked off. You don't want them thinking they're being disrespected. You don't want any of that stuff. The big question mark in the game, obviously, and as of last night and this morning, as I've done updates, it sounds like they still haven't made a decision on Bryce Young, whether he's going to play. If he does play, how healthy he's going to be, because it was an injury to his throwing shoulder. So there's just a lot of question marks about this game. Tennessee obviously coming off a big win over LSU. Both of these teams have had some games around where they looked really good, and both of these teams have looked a little against some of their better competition. Tennessee finally broke out in their third crack at a really good team, or a good team, by smacking LSU last week at LSU. In their first game, they needed overtime to beat Pitt. Pitt's not that good, right? They beat the Florida game was not as close as the final score. Florida scored late. But I thought Tennessee was a little sloppy at times in that game, Ryan, and kind of let Florida hang around a little more than they should. Bama obviously went on the road and barely beat Texas. Honestly, should have lost that game, should have lost to A&M last week, but they made the plays they needed to win the games, and that's what good teams do, right? You can say woulda, coulda, shoulda, but they didn't lose those games. But you don't have Bryce Young, and this is a completely different football team without Bryce Young. And you're seeing when he's out what you and I discussed before the season. They don't have the weapons that they've had in the past on offense. They are generated by their quarterback. And you're also seeing that Bill O'Brien still thinks he is trying to outsmart everybody instead of just saying, my dudes are better than your dudes. Right? So this is an intriguing matchup. Obviously at Tennessee, this is a great rivalry, but it's been a minute since Tennessee's won in this matchup, Ryan. And so you look at it and you say, okay, what intrigues you about this matchup? What is your prediction? Because I believe you and I had a different prediction on this, Ryan. I'm pulling up the score now to see that. Yes. Nope. That's Vince. Sorry. Yes. You and I had a different prediction on this one as well. So let me hear your prediction. Let me hear what you think about this matchup and why you went with the prediction that you did.
I almost did a cop-out on the prediction for this one, Brian, because it truly is hindering kind of on Bryce Young.
Like Sean Stiers did? Yeah.
Did he?
He gave me 2 predictions. Yes. He gave me 2 predictions. Yes.
I forgive Sean because I almost did the same exact thing. Because I'm like, if Bryce Young plays, I think that it's going to be I think it's going to be a close game regardless, but I think it's just going to be the separator for it, right? Because, I love Hendon Hooker. I actually like both defensive ends for Tennessee as well. Byron Young and Tyler Barron are both really talented football players. Byron Young's coming off of a 4-sack game, I think, last week. So they are getting some pressure on the quarterback. They had a really nice game against LSU, obviously. Hendon Hooker actually didn't even have a great game against LSU, and they still won 40-13 convincingly in that one.
They could have had at least 2 more touchdowns on that game if he was a little bit more accurate.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was not one of his best games, but they still were able to blow out LSU in that football game, which was, I think, a great indicator of how talented Tennessee is. They are a very talented football team. That's why I think it's going to be a close game. I ultimately predicted Alabama to win 37-34 because I think in this type of game, if Bryce Young is a game-time decision and he's able to go, I think he will, right? But I will say this, to my slight cop-out, is if it's Jalen Milroy and not Bryce Young, I would take Tennessee in the upset. But I am working off my opinion that I think that Bryce Young will be able to play. If he is, I think Alabama's just a little bit too much for Tennessee. But again, if it's not Bryce Young, that completely changes the outcome of this game. But it really just depends on Bryce Young's health for me.
There's a couple reasons that I went the opposite. My prediction for the game, excuse me, let me try that again in my grown-up post-puberty voice. My prediction was the game was a very similar score. On the website, you had 38-35. 38 to 35 is what you had on the website. 38 to 34, Alabama.
38-34. I said 37-34.
Yeah,
That's
I went 38-35 in favor of Tennessee. I do think it's going to be a higher scoring game. Neither team is great on defense. Statistically, they're both good, but they're not great. I think Tennessee has been better on defense this year than I anticipated. That, to me, is the biggest reason for Tennessee's resurgence. Not that they're great on defense, but they're better, and they serve as a really good complement to what is a very explosive offense. And honestly, Ryan, I mean, Hendon Hooker's been great all year, but I really felt like Tennessee's offense needed a few games to get going. I don't think that they really lit the world on fire. You even watched like the Kent State and the Ball State and the Akron games, they were just out towning them. They weren't super sharp, and they started to figure it out against Florida. I thought the offense did. Defense was okay, but the defense is what really impressed me against LSU. Because as you said, they didn't play great on offense. They hit some big plays, but I mean, they had some special teams mistakes that set up a score. Their defense played great in that game, and their front, I thought, was especially good in that game, really harassing Jaden Daniels, especially in some clutch moments. So I think what it comes down to is I like what that team is doing. I like the fact that their defense has stepped up and played better football. And I'll be honest with you, here's another reason why, Ryan. This is going to sound crazy, so let me explain what I'm talking about, okay? I think the big reason that I think Tennessee is going to win this football game is because of coaching. Now, Nick Saban is the best coach of this generation. That's not debatable. But I just don't like his coordinators. I don't. And, you know, Tim Banks is a decent defensive coordinator. They brought him over from Penn State. Josh Heupel is really the offensive coordinator for Tennessee. I watch Penn State or Alabama, and I say, you know, Alabama's kind of winning on talent. But look, Alabama's played 2 decent teams, 3 decent teams. And they blew out Louisiana Monroe, who stinks. They blew out Utah State, who stinks. They blew out Vanderbilt, who stinks. They struggled against Texas. They struggled against Texas A&M. The 2 best coached defenses they've played all year, they couldn't move the ball. You say, well, they didn't have Bryce Young against A&M. True, but they had him against Texas, and it didn't matter. And I just don't think they have the weapons to kind of overcome Bill O'Brien like they did last year, even with Bryce Young. So, because if he plays right, he's not going to be 100%. Now, knowing Bryce Young, he's still going to be sharp and really good because he's a tremendous quarterback. But the weapons aren't there. The offensive line has had some issues in a couple of games protecting the quarterback. They haven't, you know, not most of the games, but at times you can get a little bit of pressure on them. And I just don't think the weapons are there. I just trust Tennessee's weapons. And Alabama is one of those weird offenses that their statistics look way better than what their film does on offense. And their statistics, to me, like when I watched them play against A&M last week, Ryan, I mean, if I'd have just told you before the game that Alabama's going to go out there and run for 288 yards on Texas A&M, you'd have probably thought, okay, that's going to be a blowout, right? And it wasn't. And it just was a really weird game. And I'm not a big fan of Bill O'Brien. I know that that's probably a bias that I have. It's just, I'm not, and I've never been high on Pete Golding.
It's a correct bias on Bill O'Brien, though.
I've never been high on Pete Golding. I think he's just a very mediocre defensive coordinator, has really good players, and he has a defensive genius as a head coach that helps him out. But, you know, even like last year when these 2 teams played, Ryan, it's just kind of like when you watched Tennessee or Hendon Hooker last year, like they had some success in the pass game against Alabama last year. They just couldn't stop Alabama's offense, and they couldn't run the football. One thing that is a big difference to me with this Tennessee team is they're a little bit more consistent running the football wise. Like last year, they were way up and down. They'd have some weeks where they're like 450, and then the next week they're 60. They were very up and down. I think this year they're a more consistent rushing team. We saw that last week against LSU. They ran all over LSU. They ran on Florida. You know, they didn't run great against Pitt, but that was, I mean, you watched the game, you kind of understood why a little bit. Pitt's a really good rush defense, and also they didn't really try because Pitt couldn't defend their pass game. I think they'll be able to run a little bit on Bama. I think that Josh Heupel is going to scheme up some big play opportunities against Pete Golding, and I just think that's kind of where it came down to for me. And then the home aspect of it, right? I think that's a factor of it to me. And And so a healthy Hendon Hooker against a not healthy Bryce Young, the coaching matchup, I think that's the reasons that I saw this playing out. Now, will I be shocked if Bama wins? No. Bama's a 7-point favorite, but you wouldn't know that when you listen and read other people that are kind of predicting this game. It's like I said, Tennessee's a trendy pick. I would have rather it been the opposite. I'd have felt better about my Tennessee pick if it was, Tennessee's not ready yet. They're not going to win this game. They're going to get beat. I'd feel a little bit better about it, but the disrespect card being played in Tuscaloosa scares me a little bit because that's when I feel like they've always been their most dangerous. When people think that somebody's ready to overtake Alabama, Alabama's like, nope, we're still the big dog. And this is a rivalry game, So, I mean, all the stuff that Bama's been struggling with, I don't think that's necessarily going to be that. You always wonder, like, rivalry games, you kind of got to throw out the window. We've talked to Ladarius Martin, who's a Bama fan on our channel, like, what's the bigger rivalry, Auburn or Tennessee? I mean, Auburn's your in-state rival, but Tennessee's a heated rival too. So I think that adds a little bit to the intriguing aspects of this matchup, Ryan.
Yeah, no, it'll be really fun to watch because, I mean, like you said, Brian, I saw someone write in the chat, like, is Tennessee back? They might be, man. They're getting into a really good spot, right? And it's going to be interesting because to call someone back, right? Like that's more of a long-term thing than a short-term, right? Like they're having a good season for sure.
Right.
They're a talented football team. I talked about their pass rushers. The running game has been good with guys like Jamari Small. They have good wide receivers, obviously, on the outside as well. I mean, their best one didn't even play last week against LSU, but guys like Hyatt kind of stepped up in that matchup. And everyone knows how much of a fan I am of Hendon Hooker, right? So it's a really talented team. Long term, like next year after Hooker graduates and all that good stuff, like do they maintain it? But for now, very talented team that Tennessee has going on now.
I think what you just said right there is the biggest difference between this year's Tennessee team and last year's Tennessee team. Last year, when they started having some injuries at receiver, their offense just wasn't as good. They couldn't move the football. They couldn't be as good. That was a concern I had about the LSU game last week. That was part of the reason why I predicted that game to be a lot closer is because Tennessee's offense is a little banged up. And I thought Tillman was going to play, but just not be 100%. He didn't play. They went out there and shredded LSU. So that said something to me about, and that game also said something to me too. That game is the main reason why I picked Tennessee this week on top of all the other matchups. And here's what I mean by that. Tennessee has had some moments where they've had some big wins in the past, even under Butch Jones and in past years. But the problem would be is they were just so inconsistent that they would kind of flake out some weeks. And I was one of the things I was concerned about last week was, are they going to be overlooking what's an okay Tennessee team to Bama next week?
Right.
And that would be natural. And they didn't. They came out against LSU and just poured it on them early. And I said, that's a sign of a team that's showing me growth and maturity because they're able to focus on, hey, Bama doesn't matter if we don't handle our business today. Now, that sounds easy sitting here and in a chat, but I'm telling you, on a football team, that's not as easy as it sounds, especially when you got Bama coming up next, who's a rival. And that showed me that this is a different Tennessee team than the ones we've seen in the past. This is a team that's got they got some substance to them on top of the flash. And, they've had to grind out wins. And both of these teams have been tested, Ryan, and that adds another intriguing, layer to this. They've both been tested against inferior opponents and had to come out on top. Because you can say, well, I can't believe Alabama almost beat Texas. Also, almost lost Texas A&M. And then you can say, well, I can't believe Tennessee almost lost to Pitt. Right? And so I think it's going to be a great game. Will you be shocked if one team blows out the other? Either way.
Shocked? No, shocked isn't the right word. No, I mean,
surprised.
Surprised is a better word.
I'll be surprised.
I mean, I'll say this, Brian. I wouldn't be super surprised if Tennessee gave it to Alabama a little bit if Bryce Young didn't play. Like if it ended up being, because I think it's going to be a close game. But if you told me Bryce Young didn't play and Tennessee won 35-20, I would not be really surprised if I'm being honest. Like I think that's the difference maker, man. Like that's the separator. I think it's going to be a close football game, especially if Bryce plays. But if Bryce doesn't play, I think Tennessee has a shot, man, to make a little bit of a statement this week. Like I do. So that's the separator. That's really the ultimate separator for me.
My prediction of Tennessee winning is assuming that Bryce Young is going to play. I just don't like this Bama team. I don't. I
Yeah.
really don't. And here's a hot take for you, I guess, Ryan, if this is what depending on what you view as a
I
hot
love
take.
hot takes. I love hot takes.
I'm obviously predicting Alabama to lose this weekend. It will not
Mhm.
be their only regular season loss.
Mm. Mm. I
How
don't know if
about
that's
them
super hot.
apples?
I haven't really
Yeah.
looked at their schedule, so that might not be
They
that hot.
play
I'm not
home
sure.
against Mississippi State. They don't play, and I'm
Mhm.
not talking about the SEC title game. I'm talking about regular season.
Mhm.
So they play at Tennessee tomorrow. They play home against Mississippi State, at LSU, at Ole Miss, home against Austin Peay, home against Auburn. So
Mm.
yeah.
Who are you thinking in there?
Not
Ole
sure.
Miss, I guess. I don't know.
It's kind
That's
of like
yeah.
of these teams, of Mississippi State and Ole Miss, I think one of those two teams can
They
knock them
trip up
off.
once.
I do.
Okay,
Yeah.
understood.
I mean, and like last year's Alabama team, again, sputtered through the regular season, right? They did.
Mhm.
Well, they don't have Jamison Williams and John Mechie to bail them out in the SEC title game like they did last year, where they just go
Mhm.
rip a team up. And that's the same team that almost lost to Auburn.
Yeah.
I mean, they're just they lost to a 4-loss Texas A&M team, who lost to Mississippi State and LSU. They just haven't been as dominant the last 2 years. They haven't. Now they have been masked. This is what we said about Clemson, and I see a lot from Alabama that I saw from Clemson. Because remember, we predicted last year's drop out of Clemson. Because what I said was at the time was Trevor Lawrence and Travis Etienne are masking a lot of flaws, especially coaching flaws. And Tony Elliott was 100% exposed last year when he didn't have Trevor Lawrence to save him, right? 100% exposed, and Travis Etienne to save him, right? And I see a lot of the same stuff with Alabama. Like, you've got Will Anderson that just protects you from some of your bad calls and some of your bad game plans because he's just better than anyone else he's ever going to play.
Did you see down the stretch against Texas A&M? Will Anderson I don't think recorded a sack in the game, but he was a dude when it mattered, man. Like just pressure after pressure. Just yeah.
And he's masking flaws that exist from a coaching standpoint. Not at Saban. Saban's great, but the coordinators to me are just not there. This is an Alabama team that last year, obviously had the bad loss to Texas A&M, but there was other games you're like, give Florida one more possession, and that's a different ball game. You know what I mean? Like if Florida could have just made one more stop, and that was a bad Florida team. So I just they had an ugly win over LSU, as bad as they were last year, had a shot to beat Alabama at the end of the game.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just look at it and I say, this is just not a great football team. Like it's a really talented football team, but it's not a great football team. And I just think they're going to get tripped up. And I know Bama fans are going to read this and be all mad and all those other type of things. But I mean, that's just the stuff I see. The talent's there, Ryan, for the most part. They've had some injuries at receiver and all that, but I think it's more of a coaching problem because you're putting so much on these kids. It's similar to what we've talked about with Notre Dame. You're putting so much on these young kids, and they're not able to play fast to the level that they need to, and just I'm not a big way. I'm not a big fan of the coaching that they have from a coordinator standpoint.
Some Alabama fans are going to clip this, Brian. You're going to get invited on Elephant Bait and to talk about it.
Right? Well, the best part is you hear all these LSU fans, well, Kelly inherited a bad situation. I'm like, wasn't that the thing you were most pissed about that I said? Is that I said LSU was a dumpster fire? And now you're basically saying, well, that's what Brian Kelly was hired to do. It's like, well, okay, then what were you mad about? Is it one of those things where we can say it, but you can't? Is that really what you were mad about? So
the excuses are starting, man. They're starting. Already happening.
I love it. Get used to it. But I mean, again, Nick Saban is still the head coach, right? Yes. So at the end of the day, they still have Will Anderson. End of the day, I could see them still winning this game. I won't be shocked if Alabama wins. I think Tennessee winning is a bit of an upset. I do. I just think this is one of those games that sets up nicely for them to get knocked off, even if Bryce Young plays.
I think this is if Alabama wins, it's because their dudes are dudes, right?
Yes.
To your point, right?
That's exactly right. Jahmyr Gibbs is going to make some sick run.
Jahmyr Gibbs, Will Anderson, Henry To'oTo'o, like someone's going to make a play where you're just like, yep, that's a future first or second round pick.
Like, McKinstry Bates heading into a mistake that turns something like that. It'll be that. And that's what happened last year. Is their dudes just stepped up and played like dudes when they needed them to. That it looked pretty like if Steve Sarkisian was still the offensive coordinator, I'm not predicting Tennessee to win this game. I'm not. No matter who the quarterback is, I'm really not. If Kirby Smart was still the defensive coordinator at Alabama, I would not be predicting Tennessee to win this football game because Will Anderson would be even better, and other guys would be even better. So that's really where this all comes down to for me. So Ryan has Alabama winning. I have Tennessee winning. Last quick thing, Ryan. If you're wrong, it will be because of why?
It's a combination of things, right? It's if Bryce Young is limited or not available to play, I think obviously that's a big hurt loss for Alabama. And I think the other side of it is Brian, like I think that defensively for Tennessee, if they're able to make a couple plays, like a couple big impact plays. I talked about Byron Young, their defensive end that had, I think, 3 or 4 sacks last week. If there's a strip sack, interception, a couple turnovers, I think, on the defensive side of the football, because like you said, Tennessee is playing. It's been a little sporadic, but they're playing pretty good defense for the most part, man. Like they're got a couple guys defensively. I talked about Barron. I talked about Young.
They complement
get a couple
the
plays
really well.
Exactly. If they're opportunistic on the defensive side of the ball, an interception, a strip sack, something like that, then I think that's the big difference maker potentially for Tennessee.
And that's what they did every time LSU tried to get back in the game last week. The defense would step up with a big sack, a big turnover, just something like that. So, yes, they are a really good complement to their offense. I think that's a very good observation. If
Tennessee's
I'm wrong,
defense is horrible. Darius, come on, man. Come on.
They're not this year.
No.
If I'm wrong and Alabama wins, it's going to be 2 things. Number 1, their talent just takes over. I think you nailed that part, Ryan. And number 2 is Bryce Young plays and he's Bryce Young. Because the danger is always when a kid is injured, that he's just so locked in because he knows he has to kind of overcome the pain. He's so locked in that we've seen it. Jordan, what he did in the playoffs, or was it the NBA Finals that one year where he's got the flu? He just goes off. Like Larry Bird coming in.
He had 40 points with the flu.
Yeah. Larry Bird, Celtics are playing the Pacers and they're getting beat. Larry Bird breaks his cheekbone. He goes in the locker room. And he comes back out and he's just so locked in. He just eats up the Pacers in the fourth quarter. They win. We've seen it with the Joe Montana chicken soup. We've seen it. The great ones do that, and Bryce is a great one.
Yeah.
That's the reality of it. He is a great one. And if he's playing, it's hard to bet against him, right? So that it'll be that. As much as I love Hendon Hooker, and I think Hendon Hooker's a great player, if all things are equal, Bryce Young's the better player. And that it'll be that. I think those 2 things will be the factor for me, Ryan. The Alabama dudes, just especially on defense. I think that's more true on defense than it is on offense. And that's by my knock on. I don't think Bama has the dudes that they've had in the past on offense. Somebody said the Willis Reed game. That's another great example. They do have those dudes on defense.
Didn't he break his ankle or something? Wasn't that what it was for Willis Reed? Like it was hobbling up the court.
Really hurt, but he still went out and balled.
That's crazy.
The dudes are on Alabama, right? Yeah. The defense, that's where their dudes are, and that's where the plays will be made, right? That's where I feel about that.
Can we play a quick game before we move on to the next one? Ready? I want you to fill in the blank. Hendon Hooker is the best Tennessee volunteer quarterback since
Peyton Manning.
Wow. Yeah. It might be, man.
All due respect to T. Martin, who won a national championship. That was a great Tennessee team. I'm trying to think of who else could it be.
Eric Ainge, I guess, was a good player. He was a good player.
I thought Tyler Bray was about to go off for a minute there.
Yeah.
You remember when he kind of started his career off pretty good? It's not Casey Clausen, right? With all due respect to the Clausen family. It's definitely not Jarrett Garantano. That's for sure. Josh Dobbs was a fun player. I always thought he was a little overrated. The problem with Josh Dobbs is he just wasn't part of a good coaching staff, in my opinion. No. I would have liked to see what he could have done, but I always thought he was a little bit overrated, to be completely honest with you. Like I said, I thought Tyler Bray was about to go off, and then he just never quite panned out. But Jonathan Crompton. Who else could it be?
Joe Milton.
Joe Milton beat him out, man. Joe Milton beat him out. Yeah. No, I think, the way he's played, the thing about it is, Ryan, he's so precise. He's so smart. He goes, it's like he's in the last 2 years, he's thrown 3 interceptions in the last 2 years.
It's insane, man.
None this year. So he's thrown 41 touchdowns and 3 interceptions, completed 68% of his passes last year, 70 this year against SEC teams. because he's just really smart and he's a gamer, and I use that expression complimentary, not like the sucks as a practice player, just that guy that just makes plays, man. He's not always pretty. You don't watch him and think, ooh, top 5 NFL draft pick, right? Like he doesn't have like the body and physical tools of Justin Fields. Or Trey Lance or Zach Wilson. He just knows how to play, man. And so I love the kid as a player. I do. I think he's a great player. I do.
Sure
he's a lot of fun. He's a lot of fun.
Talk about perseverance too, with everything that happened at Virginia Tech, man, and not winning the starting job at Tennessee. Like great story.
He could have been so down on himself. I mean, he could have, but he's without question their best quarterback. I mean, I guess you could say since T, because T was after Peyton, but I just think he was better than T. There's no doubt. There's no doubt. But he's a heck of a player. And Bryce Young is got a chance to create his own legacy. And these are the kind of games where legacies are built, right? And I want to see him kind of go on the road, because this is my question about Bryce Young. And again, I think part of this is it's not his fault. They haven't had these opportunities. But what's the regular season road game against a really good team that Bryce Young has had to really step up and play well? Best you could say in his 2 years of starter was Texas. And that's literally the best. I mean, last year their road games were A&M, who wasn't very good, and they lost. And Florida, who wasn't very good, and they almost lost.
Yeah.
Auburn almost lost. It's the other part of this, right? You look at Alabama the last couple of years, they haven't been a great team away from home. Outside of the Mississippi State game, they barely beat Florida 31-20. Now, they had a big lead, but they almost lost it, right? They lost to Texas A&M on the road. They beat Mississippi State by 40. Big win. But then their next road game is at Auburn, and they should have lost that game. This year away from home, they went and played Texas, almost lost. Now, they played at Arkansas. That was a big win. If Bryce doesn't go down, Arkansas never climbs back in. Do we agree on that? So, but Arkansas has turned out to not be a very good team this year. I mean, they're not what we thought they were going to be preseason. So these are not games that Alabama has necessarily played real well in the last couple of years, right? And I'm talking like true road games, not SEC title game on a neutral field where they ripped up Georgia. I get that. True road games are different than those type of games, in my opinion. So that's an interesting part of this one as well. Let's go to the Big 12, Ryan. Another week, another Big 12 matchup. The Big 12 has been a fun conference this last week. Did you watch the West Virginia Baylor game last night?
Most of it, yeah.
All you need to do is watch the last 3 minutes. I mean, that was a wild last 3 minutes of that game last night. Big 12 looks a lot more like pre-2021 Big 12. This isn't a defense. Like, it was such a weird anomaly year where you had the two best teams in the league played great defense. They won with defense. They're back to being an offensive league again. And this is an exciting matchup. You've got number 8 Oklahoma State heading to Fort Worth to play number 13 TCU. The game will be at 3:30 on ABC. TCU is a 4-point favorite. This is it's not necessarily conference supremacy because it's still early where most teams have only played like a couple conference games. But certainly the winner has a tremendous opportunity, Ryan, to stake their claim to being the best team in the Big 12. And for Oklahoma State, it's a chance to solidify what people thought they were going into the season with a big road win. For TCU, it's a chance for them to prove their legitimacy. And the reason I say that is, yes, they're 13th, but you and I both know there's a lot of people saying, well, yeah, but Oklahoma sucks, and Kansas and Kansas is Kansas, and they lost Jalen Daniels. Yes. So this is a chance for TCU to say, no, we are legit. We're going to show it to you by beating Oklahoma State. And it's for Oklahoma State to say, no, we're the team to beat in the Big 12 this year, right? And can I also say this? I love the fact that the Big 12, the best teams in the Big 12 so far this year are actual Big 12 teams that want to be in the Big 12, not future SEC teams. I'm not going to lie to you. Yeah. That's one of the reasons I always like watching Oklahoma lose. It's one of the reasons I've really enjoyed it this year is because, like, you're getting killed in the Big 12. Good luck in the SEC, buddy. Can't wait. But anyway, Oklahoma State, number 8, number 13, TCU, Ryan. This is going to be I think we can all agree we'll be a little shocked if this is a 17-14 game.
Yeah. Well, I think, Brian, I mean, no, you're absolutely correct. I mean, I had it 38-27 Oklahoma State in this one. And the reasons that I think that for me is one we saw last week against Kansas, right? You came out with a 38-31 victory or whatever it was, but Jalen Daniels got hurt. They bring in the backup quarterback, Jason Bean, who's a good dual threat kid, but not a really great quarterback, right? And you struggled to defend him. So I think that this week you're going to struggle again against Spencer Sanders, because I do think that Spencer Sanders, for the most part, has played pretty consistently over the season. Last week was an up and down game, but he has played a lot more consistent than the majority of his career. He's got that dual threat ability, but I think that ultimately the biggest difference is that I think TCU is going to be able to score a little bit, right? They got Max Duggan that we've talked about. Quentin Johnson's coming off of a great football game. Kendra Miller's a good running back.
One. Yeah, called that one.
Did you call 14 for 200? Like, wow.
Well, I said he was going to have a breakout. I didn't think it was going to be that. But,
that was certainly a breakout.
Didn't he have a big play called back too?
I think
like
so,
a catch that they had ruled out of bounds. No, it was no, they should have ruled him out of bounds. They ended up not overturning it. The touchdown pass, I wasn't sure if he was in or not, but it just wasn't close. But I think that was it. But he had a breakout last week.
So they have a lot of weapons. So I do think TCU is going to score a little bit. I think ultimately, though, what is the difference in the football game, aside from I just think Spencer Sanders is going to have a pretty good football game, is that the crux to TCU's team right now for me is that TCU does not have very good offensive tackles. Like, their offensive line has been playing okay inside, but offensive tackle-wise, not very good. And Oklahoma State has the advantage there, right? You talk about Colin Oliver, talk about Brock Martin, a couple really good defensive ends for Oklahoma State. I think they'll be able to get enough pressure on Duggan to make one or two bad mistakes and just kind of eliminate some of the big plays in this one. So I think it's a competitive game throughout the majority of the game, but I think Oklahoma State's distanced themselves in the fourth quarter because I think the pressure from Oklahoma State is going to be just a little bit too much. And I think that we saw last week that TCU's defense has come a long way, but they still are going to struggle against some of these dual threat quarterbacks. So I think Spencer Sanders has a good game, and Oklahoma State's pass rushers are the difference in this one.
You have been disrespecting TCU for weeks. You have not been giving them their due. You picked Kansas to beat them last week.
That's wrong. That's not true.
Are you sure?
I picked TCU. Okay. Yep, I picked TCU last week.
You were hating on their defense last week, which turned out to be right. You didn't give them any respect against Oklahoma. I'm totally kidding, because we both feel the same way. We actually have a different score, Ryan, but we have the same margin. I see it being a competitive game that Oklahoma State pulls away late is how I see it. And it really comes down to a couple things. Number one is, I think you nailed it, Spencer Sanders versus Max Duggan. I really like what Max has done this year, but he's not Spencer Sanders. I will argue, however, that TCU might have better weapons around him, but I think Oklahoma State's offensive line is better. So that combination to me is there. And I also think the matchup that you nailed that I think is going to have the biggest impact is Brock Martin and Colin Oliver against the TCU tackles. They have not faced a pass rush like this. Now, TCU's defense Oklahoma State's defense is not that good this year. It's not like it was last year at all. But they can heat you up when they need to. They did that to Texas Tech last week. I mean, Texas Tech was outplaying Oklahoma State for 3 quarters. And you and I were talking during the game. It's like, no, Spencer Sanders back to being Spencer Sanders. But you know what? In the fourth quarter, when the game was on the line, he stepped up and made plays. And that showed me something. Like, do you revert to those bad habits when times are tough? He didn't. He made mistakes in the game. He had some misses. He had some plays that I think he threw a pick in the game, had another ball that could have been picked. But when the game was on the line, he stepped up and made plays, and that says something to me. Obviously, being in Fort Worth gave me a little bit of pause. There's some aspects of this matchup that I think favor TCU. I think TCU can run the ball on Oklahoma State in this game and then create some big play opportunities, which is why I see a higher scoring game than you do, Ryan. I went 45-34. So a little bit higher scoring game. You were, I think, 38-27. So I'm basically giving each team another touchdown. I do think it'll be that, but I think at the end, the pass rush of Oklahoma State and the playmaking of Spencer Sanders is going to make it look like the Texas Tech game. Oklahoma State won 41-31, Ryan. It was not a 10-point game for 50 minutes of the 60 minutes. It wasn't. Texas Tech was right there with Oklahoma State and had a lead for a chunk of the game. But at the end of the game, the pass rush and Spencer Sanders carried the day. Texas Tech's proven to be a really spunky team. They battle. They really compete under Coach McGuire. I think TCU will do the same, but I think the outcome at the end of the day will be the same. I think TCU is getting closer. They have some weapons, but they're just not quite there yet in the trenches on the offensive side of the ball. And I think that will be the difference in this particular game.
I didn't know what to think about the Sonny Dykes hire when it first happened, Brian. Like, I just wasn't sure about it. It was definitely different, right? Which different is sometimes good, right? Like, you went from Gary Patterson to the opposite extreme there, very offensive-driven head coach. But hats off to Sonny Dykes, man. He has immediately put energy into this program that was lacking over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
So I think, again, to your point, TCU is headed in the right direction. It's just, again, it's going to take a couple years to get your guys fully in board, right? To get the depth issues to remedy those types of things. But Sonny Dykes has done a great job for TCU, and I think that they'll stay around for a long time in this football game. I just think that Oklahoma State has just a little more deep of a roster, and I just think that they are better in the spots that really matter for me.
Yep. I'm gonna be honest with you. I liked the Sonny Dykes hire. I did. And the reason why is because I think it was if you're good, I'm a believer that if you're going to make a change at head coach, then you go with the difference of what you had.
Sure.
And I did not like that they did what they did to Gary Patterson. I'm on record as saying that. He deserved better than how you treated him. Having said that, once you put that out in the rear view, how do I evaluate the hire that they made? I liked it. And I think, honestly, Sonny Dykes made a very bad career choice that slowed his ascent down, and that was going to Cal. It's a bad fit for him as a person. Now, he had some success there, but it was a bad fit for him, and they fought against him the entire time. Like, you hire a guy, and then you fight against him the entire time as he tries to build the program up. They went 1-11 in his first year. By year 3, they were 8-5, and then just things kind of went downhill from there. And I thought at SMU he was able to rebuild the program up a little bit. They went 8-4 last year in a really good American Conference. Like the American last year was Houston was pretty darn good last year. Cincinnati was obviously really good last year. I thought Memphis was still good, not as good as they were, but still good. And that's who they lost to. And the only bad loss they had last year was Tulsa. They beat TCU last year at TCU. And he also, it's funny, he beat his future employer and his previous employer because he also beat Louisiana Tech last year, which is where he got his head coaching start. So I think he's a really good offensive mind. I think he's a Texas native. That's the other part too that was really important to that. He is a Texas guy. And so I did like the hire. I did. I'm not going to lie to you. Now, did I think that TCU? Does that mean that I thought TCU was going to be sitting here at 5-0 and ranked 13th? No, I didn't. I definitely didn't see that one coming. But I did like the hire. I thought it was a good hire, and I felt that something was gonna work out well for him. And look, he's grown up in this, right? I mean, he's Spike Dykes' kid. Right? I mean, he's he's Texas through and through to me. And so I'm not surprised he's doing well. And I think that there was one of the questions was who's going to take Big 12 supremacy? I think this game is going to have a big say in that. But I think that Spike Dykes, because he is a Texas guy, he does come from a Texas family that's got deep, deep roots. His dad was a high school coach in Texas for decades before he took over, went to Texas as an assistant, eventually took over as head coach at Texas Tech for 13 years, had a winning record at Texas Tech, Ryan, as well during his tenure, and took them to seven different bowl games, right? So this is a Texas legacy. I think he's going to recruit there, and I think these two teams are going to me, be the superior teams in the Big 12 in future seasons because I don't see Baylor staying there because I don't see Dave Aranda being there long-term. Dave Aranda stays at Baylor for the foreseeable future, then Baylor will be in that conversation as well because he's just a heck of a coach and he'll recruit better. But I think Sonny Dykes is going to recruit the state really well, and I think they're going to be a major player. I don't know. It's just not in 2022 for me. I think Oklahoma State will still be that team to beat.
I think TCU is like one of those teams, Brian. I talked about this with Arizona State a little bit. Like what I guess maybe it's the uniforms and like kind of the stigma around the program. When they're good, they're kind of a cool team, right? Like people kind of get drawn to them a little bit.
About TCU?
So, yeah, TCU. Just like those black uniforms and like it's just something about them, man. That's like a cool kind of vibe, right? Yeah. So I think that Sonny Dykes has an opportunity here, man. Like I really do. And I mean, to your credit, right? Nobody predicted them to be undefeated at this point. Like I have a good friend that covers TCU football that is shocked that they are still undefeated, if we're being completely honest. So again, hats off to Sonny Dykes, man. He's done a great job so far in TCU.
Yep, absolutely. So Ryan, let's move on to a matchup that kind of impacts Notre Dame a little bit. And that is number 7 USC at number 20 Utah. Now, when we were previewing the previous game, I was busting your chops a little bit about your lack of respect for TCU. Just kidding, because obviously, as you said, you picked them to win last week. I actually did think that you picked Kansas to win last week, because we were split as a staff 3-3. And so it was me and you picked TCU, and one other, I can't remember, and then 3 other people picked Kansas. I know why Sean Steyer's picked Kansas. He's a graduate of Kansas.
So he's a Kansas guy. Yeah.
He has to pick them. But the one team that I have been down on this year and have picked to lose twice in our predictions, and they've lost both times, is Utah. USC is ascending. Utah is a strange team. Some weeks they look, man, that's a really good football team. And then other weeks they don't look as impressive. USC has been winning, but at times winning ugly. This is an intriguing matchup, Ryan. And I must admit, I was surprised to see it's going to be 8 o'clock on Saturday on Fox. Utah's a 3.5-point favorite, and that has not moved. I have a buddy of mine who's into sports betting, and he says even though a lot of public money is going to USC, they still haven't moved the line. Crazy. And so it tells me and I don't know what that means. I had to have him explain it to me, but basically the people that make a lot of money off of betting are taking Utah, which I found very fascinating. And as much as disrespect as I've been giving them in recent weeks, Ryan, I'm going there too. You also picked Utah. So let's talk about this matchup, because it is very intriguing. I mean, on paper, this should be a game USC wins. USC won the most recent meeting in Salt Lake City. The caveat being, I believe it was the COVID year. But this has been a game that this is a place they've had a hard time winning, with the exception of their most recent trip there. So that's part of it. But this is a different USC team, Ryan. So let's talk a little bit about this USC-Utah matchup, and then we'll talk about why we're going with the Utes as far as our prediction.
Yeah, I mean, for me, Brian, I just think that at some point USC is going to come down to earth a little bit, man. Like you said, they haven't been overly tested. They've won a couple ugly games. I think they're due for a game that it's just kind of like, okay, we're not fully there yet, right? Like, we're not a legit top 5, top 10 team in the country. Like, I think they're just due for one of those, man. And I know Utah has been sporadic and they've lost a couple football games and all that stuff, but I just really think that Utah is going to come out here, and Utah is going to be the more veteran team that is going to be less volatile on a snap-to-snap basis. Like, that's what I think in this game, right? And I think that USC also offensively, I think it's just kind of been a little up and down, man. Like, they're scoring points because they have a lot of talent, right? I mean, you have Caleb Williams, you have Jordan Addison and Mario Williams and that whole crew, and it's a very talented skill position. But I think you still have kind of seen mixed results, as far as you would think that with all that talent, the offense would be even more explosive than they have been so far. So I think that Utah defensively has some guys that I've talked about before. I think that Clark Phillips is an absolute stud. I think Bishop, the safety, is a good football player. There are some guys where I think this is going to be an ugly football game. I think that Utah is going to force USC to play their game, and I don't know if USC is going to be able to counteract and play that style of game. So I have it 23-19 Utah. You mentioned the 3.5. Utah barely covers that point spread, and they win by 4 points in an ugly game against USC. That's how I see this one.
Interesting. Here's the issue that I have, and I went Utah 30-27, and I feel really uneasy about it. It's the game I'm least confident in this weekend. But the reason why is because I'm a matchups guy. I'm not this team did this against that team. Like, for example, the fact that USC should have lost to Oregon State and Utah blew Oregon State out means nothing to me, because they're different matchups. But I just watched this USC team and I say, their skill is really good. Their offensive line is really hit or miss. They've struggled against the two, I would argue, the two best defenses they've played this year are Oregon State and Washington State. Mm-hmm. They were under 500 yards or under 400 yards in both games. They went for 369 against Washington State. They went for 357 against Oregon State. But not only that, sometimes yards can be misleading. It's short fields, time of possession, whatever. They were 5.4 yards per play against Washington State and 4.9 yards per play against Oregon State. So they just haven't been. So there's two schools of thought to this. Number one is this is the week that it all clicks for them, and they just rip Utah up, right? Mm-hmm. The other thought is, no, that's who USC is right now in year one, with a bunch of transfers that are still trying to get on the same page. and it becomes a trench game. And if it becomes a trench game, they win. Because I want to ask your opinion on this before I give mine. What did the last week's game against UCLA do for you, in your opinion, of Utah, and how it impacts your thoughts on this particular matchup?
So if USC is able to run the football, I think that was the biggest surprise to me last week against UCLA, is that, UCLA just had their way running the football, and they just did not do well playing against a dual threat quarterback in a Dorian Thompson-Robinson and Jack Sharp, and they had a big game, right? That's not usually typically Utah football, right, Brian? Like, usually Utah plays a tough style of run defense. Last week was a little unsettling for me in this prediction, if I'm being honest. This prediction for me is more about USC than it is about Utah. Because someone said in the chat, and I agree completely, Utah is a little bit of a Jekyll and Hyde team. There's some weeks where you're like, yeah, they look like legit, like they might be a top 10 team. And there's other weeks where you're like, they lose a game that they shouldn't lose, right? We talk about it. UCLA, you talked about the Florida game where it looked like Florida was a good team after that one, but then Florida's come back to earth, and you're just kind of like, oh, wow, that was kind of a bad loss for Utah now that you look back at it, right? So I think they're a Jekyll and Hyde team, so I don't really take too much from Utah per se, because I just think that they're a tough team to predict from a game-to-game perspective. I more think, again, that I think that USC is just due for a game where you're just like, okay, there's still work in progress that needs to happen, man. Like, this is not a team that's there yet, right? It's just that's where I think it mostly comes from. So I ultimately just think that it's going to be a good week for Utah in the Jekyll and Hyde aspect of everything, and I think that USC is going to come down to earth a little bit in this week.
Here's why I picked Utah to lose last week to UCLA, and why I picked them to win this week, because of matchups. And I always obsess on this. The reason that I thought they were going to lose to Florida is because Utah is a good team in the trenches, but they're not what they used to be in the trenches. And just, they've lost some guys. They're in kind of one of those transition years on both lines, in my opinion. It's kind of why I didn't buy a lot of the hype that people had about Utah coming into the season, because I just didn't see the same sort of level of trench play that they need in order to be that kind of team. And that's what I thought was going to hurt them against Florida. I thought Florida was going to be able to run on them, and they did. But as we've come to find out, Florida may not be a great team this year, Ryan, but they can run the football, and they're physical running the football. UCLA might be the most physical rushing team in the country. They're at least in the conversation. And those were bad matchups because they could beat Utah at their own game. USC can't. And that's what it boils down to for me. USC is more like, a traditional Pac-12 team. Skill and talent and all that kind of stuff, but not necessarily a team that you look at and say, yeah, okay, they're going to run it on you. They're going to have success and do all that kind of stuff. I think UCLA is that kind of – UCLA is what Utah has been in the past on offense. Smash mouth, physical linemen, dual threat mobile quarterback that doesn't necessarily have to go out and throw for 400 yards a game, but he's got to make some plays with his legs and arm, that kind of thing, right? That's what UCLA is. USC, I don't think, can do that to them. And so you've seen UCLA or USC against teams that have physical fronts. Oregon State is not super skilled. That's what's hurt them this year. They're not super skilled. Their offensive line isn't as good as it's been, but they're physical. And that gave USC a lot of problems. Washington State, surprisingly this year on defense, is a pretty physical defense. They play hard. They really do. Their front seven is surprisingly aggressive and physical, and that gave USC a lot of problems. The problem is Washington State's not very good on offense. They had that really one good game against Oregon, but outside of that, this is not a Washington State team that's won with defense or won with offense. They've won with defense, Ryan. They won with defense against Cal. They won with defense against Wisconsin. And I thought they played pretty well on defense last year against USC. They just couldn't score. And I think Utah has the weapons to score. I think Utah can run on USC. I think I see this game for Utah's offense like you saw it last week against UCLA. Cameron Wright is going to make some big plays. He's going to do this, he's going to do that. My fear with last week's game, Ryan, is UCLA's defense is really erratic, but when they're on, they're pretty good this year. And they were just on last week. I don't think USC has that in them. I think USC takes a lot of chances on defense. They just haven't played teams good enough to expose and exploit those. And I think Cameron Rising can. And I think those are the two reasons why I went with Utah in this matchup. I will not be surprised if USC wins, but I just want to see. I want to see how Utah plays away from home against a team that's going to out physical them. Because we talked earlier about how well teams play away from home. USC's had 2 road games. One was at Stanford, where they won convincingly, but didn't look great. They weren't sharp. That was just more about how bad Stanford was. I mean, Stanford peed away 2 touchdown drives in that game. And the other one was Oregon State, and they got outplayed for 60. Oregon State had 3 chances to win at the end of the game. Now, credit to USC's defense on the last drive, making a play to pick it off, but the others were just about Oregon State missing opportunities, their quarterbacks missing open receivers, or doing all those type of things. And so they have not played really well away from home. And where was Utah's 2 losses, Ryan? Both away from home. At home, they destroyed Southern Utah. Who cares? Destroyed San Diego State. Who cares? Then they destroyed Oregon State. So they've played pretty well at home. And USC has not looked impressive away from home. And that factored into my decision as well. So I could be overthinking it, but that's kind of why I went with Utah. But I don't feel great about it just because I'm just not super high on this Utah team. I'm really not. But I will say this. This is the one defense in that conference that has at least a corner good enough to say, we're at least going to limit that guy. You're going to have to beat us with the others. And we'll see if Utah's going to be able to do that. And also, Jordan Addison's not 100%. And so I'm not even sure if I had read earlier in the week that there's a chance he may not even play this week. And now USC's doing all the whole, we're not discussing injury things and all that kind of stuff. But I'm curious how he's going to be. Is he going to be 100%? And we're going to find out how this USC team handles being punched in the mouth by an opponent that is more on their level. Oregon State's not on their level. They're not. How are they going to handle when a team that's got some athletes and's got some size and that kind of thing punches them in the mouth and they're away from home? That's going to tell us a lot about this USC team, because that's what makes us. And we talked about this during the summer, Ryan. What did we say about the Notre Dame game? When you look at USC, the early part of their schedule, not great. But down the stretch, they play Utah, they play Cal, who has a physical defense, and we played UCLA. We said, we're going to find out if they're tough enough to come and play with a team like Notre Dame. Now, that's when we thought Notre Dame was going to be better than what they've been so far. But that's the thing we're going to learn about USC, Ryan, and this is their first test in that regard.
It's going to be a fun one.
Yes, there's no doubt. Last few games, Ryan, we're going to work through these a little bit quicker. There's one game that I didn't bring up to you, Ryan, that I meant to, that we were going to talk about, and I'm going to start with that one first. It's number 4 Clemson at Florida State. Now, when I first thought about this matchup, Ryan, I was like, I'm not talking about that one because I think Clemson's going to kill Florida State. Florida State's not looked good in recent games. And then I looked at the line, and the line is Clemson by 3.5. That's it. I was shocked by that.
Yeah.
Because when I watched Florida State the last couple of weeks, I'm like, did you watch Florida State against NC State? Did you watch them against Wake Forest? Like, what makes you think that but that was the line, 3.5. So what is your thoughts on that, Ryan? I'm just very curious kind of because I think this game's going to be a blowout. I do. I think Clemson's going to smack them by at least 14 points.
Everybody that bets regularly knows that there's no free money out there, right? But 3.5 sounds like free money to me, if I'm being honest, man. Like, as soon as you said that one, Brian, I'm like, even you said it's at Florida State, right? Clemson at Florida State.
At Florida State, yeah.
So even though it's at Florida State, though, I think that Florida State.
So was the Wake Forest game, Ryan.
No,
so was the Florida State game, or the Wake Forest game was at home, and they got completely outplayed for 4 quarters by Florida State.
I think both of those teams are kind of going in different directions too, right? I mean, Florida State started out pretty well, and they've kind of been trending down the last couple of weeks. They had a bad showing against Wake Forest, and then they pissed a game that away against NC State. Even though Devin Leary got hurt in that football game down the stretch, their backup quarterback didn't even complete a pass, which is pretty wild to think about. So Florida State is a team that I think is trending down a little bit. I know Jordan Travis has been a little beat up, and then he was inconsistent last week against NC State. He just did not look great against NC State. And Clemson,
he's going to have games like that, Ryan. He is.
Exactly. Exactly. And Clemson has looked a lot better on offense. Am I buying that they're, this championship level offense? No, not at
But
all. But
better.
yeah, DJ's played a lot better this year than he did last year. Like, that's not a hot take.
Low bar.
He's played a lot better.
Low bar.
Yes, it is very low bar. Clemson's offensive line looks better than it did last year. Again, another low bar, but they look certainly better. Will Shipley's a good football player. They got a couple wide receivers that have done a good job, and they have that defense, right? So right. I am on the same wavelength with you. I think this is a blowout, and I'm not sure why that line is that way, but and they're, people in Vegas are a lot smarter than I am, so maybe they know something that I don't know, but just based upon the line, it sounds like free money to me.
Yeah.
But I guess I could be wrong there.
I think a lot of it is people are just not confident in Clemson's offense. I think that's really what it boils down to. And I get it. There's and we've said this before. Their statistics, Ryan, are their scoring statistics far surpass their offense, the talent or the ability of their offense. And Clemson's played 6 games this year. Do you know that in 4 of those 6 games they've been held under 380 yards of total offense?
That's crazy.
Including their 2 most recent wins. They went for 354 against NC State, and they went for 364 against BC. They were just okay. The reason is their defense is so dang dominant that they just keep them in games, and give them chances. And they haven't played a team like Wake Forest, who was skilled enough to make plays on him and had a 6-year starting quarterback who just made a lot of plays. And so, early in the game last week, Phil Dracovic was making plays on him early last week. And then just the offensive line just couldn't protect him, and he just got his brains beat in the second half. But BC was moving the ball a little bit early. Yep. But you just can't do that for 4 quarters against them. And that's the thing is, I don't know if they've got Zay Flowers and George Takis and guys like that. I don't think Florida State has those kind of weapons. Now, Jordan Travis is going to have a better line in front of him, but not enough to keep Clemson in check, Clemson's D-line in check. So I think this is going to be a minimum 13 to 14-point game. I was really shocked by that 3.5-point spread. And it's not because I have a lot of faith in the Clemson offense, because I could see that being the score like 27-13 being a 14-point game. I don't think it's going to be overly competitive. This is not a great Clemson team. It's a really good Clemson team. It's not a great Clemson team. No. But, Florida State's really only played 2 good teams this year, with all due respect to the team that they beat in the opener. And honestly, they got outplayed and outcoached in both of them. And that was Wake Forest and NC State. They should have beat NC State. They should have. And they just got outplayed, and just couldn't make those money plays to win the game. And now, part of that was, like you said, Jordan Travis had a rough game. If Jordan Travis bounces back with a good game, they can beat Clemson. They can beat Clemson. I do think they can, but they're going to need to play their best. That means Verse is going to have to take over and put pressure on the quarterback. They're going to have to shut down the run game and make DJ beat you from sitting in the pocket, because I still don't think he can do that. I still don't think he can just sit back and beat you in the pocket if your running game isn't going. And the Clemson running game hasn't been quite as good the last 2 weeks as it had been. And I think that's why you're seeing the offense kind of sputter a little bit. So I think that's gonna be a big part of this too. I just don't know what to make of Florida State. I don't.
They're a weird team, man. Talk about Jekyll and Hyde. They're a Jekyll and Hyde team.
If they play against Clemson like they did against BC, they can beat Clemson, right? Mm-hmm. It just I don't know what to make of them. So we're gonna see how that game plays out. We're gonna stay in the state of Florida for the next game, Ryan. Mm-hmm. That is unranked LSU. Sorry, I had to. Against Florida, who's also unranked. This is a pair of 4-2 teams, Ryan, whose seasons could go in dramatically different directions based on the outcome of this game. And I'm going to set the stage for you here a little bit, because, you've got 2 teams at 4-2. They both have good wins under their belt, right? Like Florida has a really good win over Utah, a team that we had previewed and think is going to have a shot to beat USC this weekend. Mm-hmm. And they also have their other wins were over South Florida in ugly fashion, Eastern Washington, and Missouri, who's not very good. They were sloppy in the win over Missouri, but they are 4-2 and have a very good win over Utah. LSU's had some ugly wins too over not very good team. Ugly meaning the team's not very good. The Auburn game was ugly in every aspect. New Mexico 38-0. Who gives a rip? Southern 65-17. Nobody cares. They have a really good 15-point win over Mississippi State. A good Mississippi State team. And then, of course, they lost to Florida State and got destroyed last week by Tennessee. You look at these 2 teams. Florida's 4-2. You beat LSU. You get a bye week before you go play Georgia After that, you play at Texas A&M, then home against South Carolina, at Vanderbilt, at Florida. The Georgia-Texas A&M back-to-back is going to be really interesting because if they can come out of that with if they can come out of the stretch of LSU, Georgia neutral field at A&M with only 2 losses, they have a shot to finish 8-4. It's a nice bounce back year. If they can come out of that with an upset and go 2-1, which they're more than capable of beating Texas A&M. They are. Mm-hmm. But if they can come out of that 2-1, all of a sudden you've got a shot to kind of go 9-3, and you're protected by still being 8-4 if you somehow lose at Florida State, which is possible as well. So if you lose this game at home to LSU, there's going to be, because you know how patient SEC fans are, right, of their head coaches. There's going to be a lot of, seriously, you just lost to LSU at home. You barely beat Missouri. You got Georgia coming up next, then A&M. Now all of a sudden you're hoping that you can go 6-6 and make a bowl game with that kind of vibe, right, Ryan? That's Florida's case. Yeah. It's a big game for them. LSU just got blasted at home by Tennessee, barely beat Auburn. So the shine is off the Mississippi State win quite a bit. Next week they play Ole Miss at home. The week after that they play Alabama at home. Then they play at Arkansas. Then they're home against UAB, and then they play at Texas A&M.
Now, it's a rough 3-game stretch, man.
Yes,
it's a rough 3-game
UAB
stretch.
will not be a pushover, although it's a game they should win. But that's a rough stretch. If you go into that stretch 4-3, you're talking about whether or not LSU is even going to make a bowl game. Just think about that. Let's walk through this. LSU loses at Florida. They're 4-3. Ole Miss at home. Are you picking LSU in that game?
No.
Alabama at home. I already know the answer. I don't not even going to let. So that's
LSU upset. Just kidding.
That's 4-5 because they're going to lose that one.
Yeah.
Then they get Arkansas on the road.
Tough game. Yeah, we'll see. Yeah.
And then you're home against UAB. I'll give them that one. 5 wins, and then you're at A&M. So now your season comes down to you need to win 2 out of 3 against Ole Miss at home, at Arkansas, and at A&M. You got to win 2 out of those 3 to be bowl eligible if you lose to Florida this weekend. That is not. I mean, I know that he inherited a dumpster fire. He did. But they were thinking like 8-4, build up year. You're talking about they need this game if they're going to have a shot. Because here's why I say that. The psyche of this LSU football team, Ryan, is such that if they lose this game after getting blasted last week, there's going to be a lot of dudes quitting on Brian Kelly.
Yeah.
There just will. And so, man, they are backs against the wall. And I'm trying to be as honest in my analysis as possible. This is not an attempt to take a shot at Brian Kelly. That's what he walked into. That's the dumpster fire I was referring to that he was hired to fix, right? Yeah. And so if they lose this game, Ryan, this is going to put them in a really tough spot. They're going to have at least 2 upsets to be a bowl eligible team, in my opinion, when you look at the rest of their schedule.
Yeah. This one's a weird one for me, Brian. I don't know. I'm trying to quantify why I feel this way, but mostly it's just because I'm not a believer in Florida, man. Like I'm not. I know they had a good win against Utah, but I just have not been impressed since that happened. Anthony Richardson's been extremely up and down, mostly down since that first game. So I would actually pick LSU in this football game, and that pains me to say.
Oh my!
Because I'm going to be rooting for Florida, right? And I'm not going to hide that, for obvious reasons, right? But there's just something about this game that tells me LSU is going to win, and I think LSU has a more proven defense. I think they're better on the defensive side of the football. I think they can run the ball consistently better, not better overall. I mean, because Anthony Richardson gives you a running dynamic, but also Jaden Daniels gives that to you, right? But I think the difference is in the defense in this one. So I would take LSU if I had to pick it, but I will be rooting for Florida tremendously in this game.
I agree with your pick. I'm actually going with LSU as well. I think that here's why I say this, okay? I'm going to disagree, however, with the whole I think LSU runs it better. I don't think LSU runs it better than Florida. And because I think Anthony Richardson is a more dynamic runner. And for me, the statistics bear that out. I think Florida's a very good running team. They went for 283 against Utah, 217 against South Florida, 274 against Eastern Washington, 9.8 per carry. And then they went for 231 against Missouri. Now, again, none of those teams are that good, but they ran on those teams. And I watched LSU last week against Tennessee, and they couldn't run the ball at all. They struggled to run the ball against Auburn. A lot of their yard, they struggled to run the ball against Florida State. They ran on New Mexico, they ran on Southern, and they ran on Mississippi State. Mississippi State game is the anomaly so far. So I think LSU will be able to shut down. I think LSU will be able to slow down. Like LSU got gashed last week by the Tennessee run game. That's a bit of an anomaly to me. I've watched that run defense play. They're better than that. I mean, they held Florida State to 132, 3.5 a carry. They held Mississippi State to 75. I mean, it's Mississippi State. New Mexico to 37, Auburn to 101, 3.3 a carry. I feel like last week is a bit of an anomaly. I think they're going to be better rush defense this week. I think they're going to be better prepared against Florida, which means they're going to make both teams, moral of the story, to say all that, I think both teams on defense are going to be able to force the other team to beat them throwing the football. And when it comes down to that, I'm taking Jaden Daniels over Anthony Richardson, which says a lot about the way that Anthony Richardson's thrown the football this year, that I'm taking Jaden Daniels over him. And that's really what this game comes down to. And I just think this is a desperate football team. If LSU responds to whatever the pitch is from Brian Kelly this week, if they emotionally show up for this game, I think they win. I do, because I think they match up well against this Florida team. Because if you want to hurt LSU, you got to be able to be balanced on offense. If you're a one-trick pony, and this is what helped them beat Mississippi State. Mississippi State's a one-trick pony. They can throw the football. I think you're going to have a tough time, and that's what Florida State did well. Florida State didn't put up great rushing numbers, but they made plays on the ground they needed to, especially with their quarterback, which then helped them with the passing game. You have to be balanced to beat this LSU team, and I just don't think Florida has the ability to be balanced, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. They don't have great talent at receiver, but the bigger problem is Anthony Richardson is just not a very precise –
good quarterback right now. He's not a great quarterback right now.
He's a great athlete right now. I mean, I watch him play. He's not real accurate. He doesn't process things incredibly well. His timing is not good. I mean, he's had 40% completion against Kentucky, 55 against South Florida, 53 against Tennessee, 57 against Missouri. He's had 2 games this year, Ryan, where he's averaged in the 4-point-something per attempt. That's abysmal. Yeah. He had 4.1 per attempt against Kentucky and 4.7 against Missouri. Now, he's at 8.4 for the year because he had 17.8 against Eastern Washington. And then he also went for 10.1 against Tennessee, but a lot of that was late. And they had a couple big pass plays late when Tennessee was kind of out of their base defense. But I think that's what it is for me. I'm betting on Jaden Daniels over Anthony Richardson. Now, if LSU can't stop Florida's running attack, then that's how Florida wins this game. They got to beat. Here's the keys for Florida. You got to run the football and take that pressure off Anthony Richardson. Let him hit a couple play action shots. Let him get on the perimeter because you're running the football. And number 2, you've got to eat Jaden Daniels up front. That's going to be the key. If they can put pressure on Jaden Daniels, he will make mistakes. But, Ryan, we haven't seen Florida be a great pass rushing team this year. They had 4 sacks against Missouri, but they've just the pressure hasn't been consistently good this year. They'll get sacks, but they're like third down sacks. They're they're not a great pass rushing team. And that's another part of this that I think makes this not a real good recipe for them against Florida. So, or against LSU. So as much as I hate to say it, if I'm looking at this from an analytics standpoint, not analytics standpoints, from an analysis standpoint, I just think the matchup favors LSU in this game because Florida just can't throw it. So that's where I'm at on this one. But like you, I am rooting for the Gators to win this football game.
Yes.
There's no doubt.
It's just this defense for Florida is pretty strong up the middle. I mean, Gervion Dexter's a pretty talented football player. Ventrell Miller's not a bad linebacker, but for the most part, Brian, it's just a defense that is typically extremely talented that I think lacks a lot of talent at the moment. There's the Marshall kid, the sophomore cornerback's a pretty talented player. Trey Dean is pretty talented at safety, but they just don't have. Yeah, he's extremely inconsistent. They just don't have, from a position-to-position perspective, it's just not a typical Florida defense. They just lack talent, I think, on that side of the ball right now.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. So, Ryan, that is our LSU-Florida game. Florida's a 2.5-point favorite. I didn't mention this. The game is at 7 o'clock on ESPN. So I'll be in the press box at Notre Dame watching the start of that game before Notre Dame gets started. A couple other games I want to get into. There's an interesting game in the Big 12 I just want to kind of briefly get your thoughts on, Ryan. That is number 19 Kansas at Oklahoma. I believe both teams will be without their starting quarterbacks, correct? I do not believe. I'm going to go check now, but the latest I saw, I don't think that Dylan Gabriel is back for this game. But, Ryan, so you got both teams with their backup quarterbacks in the game. Let's see here. So it says is likely to play versus Kansas is the most recent thing I saw, but they also said he might play last week as well. So they did say he's full go at practice. We'll see about that. That would be a quick comeback from the kind of hit that he took. So let's see here. That was 3 days ago. Yesterday's update was he's still in concussion protocol, but likely to play against Kansas. If that kid is still in concussion protocol on a freaking Thursday before the game, after the kind of hit he took, you are doing him a disservice. You are going to Gunnar Kiel him if you put him back in that game. That's what I think. You remember when they rushed Gunnar Kiel back after that really vicious hit he took? And he was never the same kid. He was never the same kid after that. Never the same kid. Mm-hmm. So this is an interesting matchup. Jason Bean started games last year for Kansas, so he's at least experienced, but he's not a real consistent thrower, really dynamic runner. Kansas has a chance to really – if Kansas loses this game, a lot of that shine is on, right? If Kansas can win this game, though, Ryan, you can kind of chalk up last week's loss as, hey, look, we lost our quarterback, but we're rolling now. This is a huge, huge game for Kansas. If I'm going to do the on-paper matchup, Ryan, I don't think Kansas can win this game. However, I watched a team show up last week that quit for Oklahoma.
I know. That's what makes it so tough, though, man, because, like, honestly, my heart is like, hey, man, you got to pick Kansas here, right? Because they are playing tough football. They are well coached. They are the team that looks like they would have fire coming out of a loss. Like, that's what they look like, right? Oklahoma last week looked like they quit, Brian, but I don't know why, but I can't shake it, man. If Dylan Gabriel plays, I think Oklahoma wins, but I don't think it's going to be a traumatic victory. I just, oh man, it's just such a tough game to
plays
predict.
And stays, then they'll win. Plays and stays in the game, they'll win.
Yes.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at.
Because, like, they quit last week, but, like, it was the biggest difference in that football game outside of, like, just the fact that, Texas is just more talented right now is the fact that, Oklahoma went to the Wildcat at one point, Brian, like, substantially during that football game. You're just like, you can't do anything functionally without a quarterback. Like, they just can't do it right now. Right. So if Dylan Gabriel is able to play and he is just, a good, solid football player, right? I think Oklahoma wins that football game. But my heart says Kansas, my mind says Oklahoma. So I'm having a little bit of a struggle here.
Agree with everything you said about the offense. I am not surprised that Oklahoma struggled to run the ball and score. Not surprised at all because their backup quarterback is atrocious. I mean, with all due respect to the kid, there's no other way to say it. He is bad. Which then makes me wonder, why in the heck did you not bring in Nick Evers until it was like 42-0? I get not starting him because like we said earlier in the week, do you really want to put that kind of pressure on a true freshman that your first start is, in the Cotton Bowl against Texas? But get him ready to play when it becomes obvious that you literally cannot convert a first down with the other kid at quarterback, that then put that kid in the game because then the pressure's off of him. And that's all true. Oklahoma's offensive line has struggled this year. They're not a great running team. Their weapons are good, but not like they used to be. They're just not the talented team that they've been. No. But they still have more talent than Kansas, in my opinion. But as you said, though, Kansas is a much better coached football team. Much better coached football team. They're a very veteran football team. The thing that gives me pause about picking Oklahoma and why at the end of the day I'm leaning towards picking Kansas, because we didn't do an official prediction on this one, is because everything that we just said has nothing to do with the fact that they gave up 296 rushing yards and 289 passing yards to Texas last week and quit on defense. None of that stuff about the quit and say, well, they knew they couldn't. That's if a team with heart is going to say, I remember the Notre Dame game against USC in 2013 when Tommy Rees got knocked out of the game. And that Notre Dame team knew we can't allow a single score because we can't score without Tommy. And that defense came out, and you just saw them ramp it up. I mean, they just ramped it up, and they just attacked and just dominated USC. That's what you see from teams when your quarterback is out. You see a team say, hey, look, Dylan's out. We got to step up and make some stops. From the moment that game started, that Oklahoma team looked listless and uninterested in being there. And I'm supposed to believe they're going to go home and be up to play Kansas. You know what I mean? Like, that's my concern with this, Sean, or Ryan. Somebody mentioned Sean down there. Ryan is, I don't know that Oklahoma is going to magically just care to be there, because they looked very similar against like when TCU jumped all over them. That team got rocked, and they haven't recovered yet. And I don't know if they recover now. I'll say this: the first quarter of this game is going to determine the outcome. Kansas is either going to jump all over them and just roll them, or it's going to be competitive. If it's a competitive first two quarters, Oklahoma wins. That's what I think. Oklahoma wins in the end because it's a home game, and it tells me if it's competitive in the first half, it tells me that Oklahoma at least mentally is ready to play, and they'll win in that case.
Brian, can you imagine? Because I can't imagine what Oklahoma's fan base is like right now, right? Like, you just got stomped 49-0 against Texas in your rivalry game. If they come out and they lose to Kansas too, man, I don't know where it goes from here, Brian. Like, I don't know where it goes from here, because like you don't see one and dones in college football like you do in the NFL, but like Brent's, like, that is not a good look, man.
Yeah.
Like, that is bad. And he wasn't put in a great situation, but like, it's not
Ryan. His situation isn't this. Like, that's the thing.
Not to this level.
But it's not this. It's not getting blown out by TCU in Texas. And honestly, the Kansas State game wasn't as close as the final score. It wasn't. No. It wasn't. And that was a home game. So they have literally gotten whooped at home, on the road, and on a neutral field in back-to-back games. They go home. This is a team that's reeling. I mean, he's got to be just thanking the football heavens that they have a bye week after this. But out of that bye week, and this is talking about, they will. I don't know if they can recover from this loss, Ryan, because here's what they got coming down the pike. After the bye week, they play at Iowa State, home against Baylor, at West Virginia, home against Oklahoma State, and at Texas Tech. There's a lot of potential wins in there, but there's also every single team that they play from here on out has a chance to beat them, because most of those teams have some ability to score on offense.
Yeah.
That's the key. And what are the odds that Dylan Gabriel stays healthy? Because what was my knock on him coming into the season, Ryan? You remember what it was?
Durability, and he's small.
Kid can't stay healthy, and he's small. And he always struggled against Power 5 teams when he was at UCF, because just the speed of the game is different. His release is long. But it was the durability thing was the big thing. Is this kid really going to stay healthy for an entire year? And what's to say, okay, he comes back against Kansas, maybe. Like, for me, I'm like, dude, just get the kid through this game. You got a bye week next week coming up to let the kid rest and get healthy, and you can maybe salvage your season down the stretch. Because all those games are winnable, right? That's the thing for Oklahoma, but they're also all losable as well. So you just got to get through this thing, because if they lose him again, if he goes out there and takes a heavy blow against what is it's not a real talented Kansas defense, but it's a physical Kansas defense. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
I'm not exposing him to that. I'm not.
No,
and if I'm Kansas and I see Dylan Gabriel back there, I'm heating him up early. You may think that's immoral, whatever, but you put him out there, and so I'm going to go after him, and that's just not illegally. I'm talking like blitzes and pressures, and I'm going to hit him, because that's the way to win this game. So I'm leaning towards. I think that like everything about this says Oklahoma should win on paper, but I saw a team that's quit, Ryan, and I don't know if they have enough time to recover from it.
I think this is a big this will be a big indicator of Brent Venables, though, if I'm being honest, right? Because it is down right now. If he can get his team to come out and play with energy and win this game, then it's a massive victory for him, man. Which is weird to say. A massive victory for Oklahoma would be beating Kansas, right? Like, that's crazy. I know, right? But it really would be, man, because like I'm really scared for him in this game, man, where they just come out and they just lay a goose egg and they just look disinterested and lose this game. Because, again, I don't know where it goes from here if that happens. I really don't. But, yeah, it's rough, man. It's because this is not helping recruiting. No. This is not helping confidence. Like, there is
but you know
nothing
what?
Good.
Karma. It's a little bit of karma
Sure.
right there, Ryan. Because some of the dirty tricks that Oklahoma's played on the recruiting trail this year, which we've had firsthand experience of, you know what? This is what you get. This is what you get, right?
Yeah.
You should have been more worried about your football team instead of making up stuff and trying to plant rumors and play all that other BS recruiting game, okay? Maybe you should have been more focused on your team not getting annihilated by Texas and TCU. Maybe. So who knows? Next game I want to discuss, Ryan, is there's two more games left that I want to go to real quick on this one. It's a noon game on the Big Ten Network, Minnesota at number 24 Illinois. This is a really big game for both teams as well. Minnesota has had a bye week. They have not played since they lost at home to Purdue. Really disappointing win for Minnesota. You called it. You called Purdue on the upset on this one, so that's why I wanted to bring this one as well. Illinois has been a really solid Big Ten West football team this year. The fact that right now they are, in my opinion, the best team in the Big Ten West speaks a lot of volume about how bad the Big Ten West is right now. But they are a physical football team, and they look a lot like some of Bielema's Wisconsin teams and how they play. Now, they don't have the talent that Wisconsin had when he was there, but boy, they play hard. And they are underrated of talent. Now, I say they don't have the talent Wisconsin had because he inherited a pretty good situation in Wisconsin, but they're a lot more talented, I think, than a lot of people think, with the exception of one position. And that's what makes it so hard to predict them to win week after week, is because their quarterback situation is so good. And then, of course, Tommy DeVito gets banged up last week. So how do you – I believe Muhammad Ibrahim comes back this week, I believe, for Minnesota. That's going to be a big one for them because they are a completely different football team when he plays. So, Ryan, what are your thoughts on this game? How do you see it playing out?
Yeah, I mean, they're kind of a mirror of each other offensively, man. Like you said, Muhammad Ibrahim's the guy on Minnesota's side, and then Chase Brown is the dude on Illinois, where they're just toting the rock and they're playing good physical style of football up front, man. I think it's Minnesota this week, Brian. I don't have a score prediction for this one, but I'll say I think that Muhammad Ibrahim is the ultimate X factor. If he plays, I think that you'll have enough from Tanner Morgan. I think for the most part this year, Tanner's played pretty solidly. You know, he's been efficient as a passer. And even if Tommy DeVito is in this game, I think I would still feel this way because Tommy's not very good. But then, you know, who's even worse? Artur Satowski, right?
Oh,
so
he's terrible.
It gets really bad if Tommy DeVito is not able to play. So I think Minnesota in this one.
Because will you say this to me, Ryan? Will you at least admit that what Tommy does is he can manage the negative version of the game manager of expression? He's the negative version of that, but it's also that's all Illinois needs right now.
Yes.
Get the ball where it needs to go, don't make mistakes, get the protection set, get the run checks in there, and just don't get us beat. Artur Satowski will get you beat.
Yes.
And that's the difference. And so if Tommy DeVito doesn't play, and Illinois has been very elusive, I've just read a couple articles about it just to get the latest. They're just not saying, which makes me think he's not ready yet, but they're hoping that the ankle responds over the next couple of days. That's what that means, right? Which means he's going to be he's going to be very limited. If he doesn't play, I don't think Illinois can win this game unless their defense just completely shuts Minnesota down. And I don't see that happening with Muhammad. I'm going to say it to y'all again. When that kid plays, this is a different football team. Yes. This Minnesota is a different football team when that kid plays. And getting him back, I think, because we talked about with Tanner Morgan yesterday during the mailbag, Ryan. Tanner Morgan is a good college quarterback, but he's a guy that needs stuff around him. When he was great and was it 2019, he had two great receivers to throw to and a good running game.
He's a play action RPO kid, man.
Yes.
So he needs that run game behind him.
That doesn't work if Muhammad Ibrahim's not there, who to
100%.
Me is one of the 5 to 6 best running backs in college football.
Oh, he's fantastic. And he's been that way for 5 years now, right? Like every time he's played football, he's been really good. Satowski, I remember last week, Brian, at one point, I think he had 10 completions for 16 yards.
It's nuts.
10 completions for 16 yards.
Awful.
What? Awful. So if Tommy DeVito doesn't play, I think it's Minnesota comfortably, if I'm being honest. Yeah.
Yes. And even if he plays, but he's very limited with an ankle injury and he's just a statue back there, I feel like Minnesota's going to bounce back because of that. I really do. But if Tommy DeVito can kind of play and just give them something, then they'll have a shot to win this game. So that's a very interesting one. Another one is number 15 NC State at number 18 Syracuse. What are your thoughts on this game? I'm actually going Syracuse on this one. I have not been impressed by NC State this year. I'm just not. I mean, yeah, they had a nice one over Florida State. That was more about Florida State choking that game away than it was NC State winning it. What's the win that NC State's hanging their hat on this year, Ryan? It's Texas Tech. And their second best win's what? It's a 1-point win over ECU, a Florida State win where that was more about Florida State giving that game away. I've just not been impressed with NC State this year. And of course, Devin Leary's, been banged up. Which
is he hurt? Is he out for this game?
I don't think he's out, but he got knocked out of last week's game. And the last I heard,
I had to see their backup quarterback play who didn't complete a pass the last quarter. Like, what, man? What is happening right now?
Yeah. So as of yesterday, still uncertain. So that's kind of what I thought. But again, even if he plays, he's going to be banged up and part of a struggling offense against one of the best defenses in the ACC in Syracuse at Syracuse. I like Syracuse in this game. I do. I think they're going to run. I think they can run on NC State. I think that they can shut NC State's offense. That's been the thing. Their offense has struggled this year. They can't protect Leary, and they just don't have the weapons on the perimeter. They actually have weapons on the perimeter, they're just not making plays. And a lot of it starts up front.
Devin Carter got hurt last week too, who's kind of their tall, explosive wide receiver in the court too. So I think NC State's banged up. I also agree. I lean Syracuse in this game because I think that it's tough because Syracuse is a very run-heavy team, and I don't have the statistics on NC State, but I assume they're a pretty good run defense because they have a crazy good linebacker crew, like really good linebackers. Peyton Wilson, Isaiah Moore, Drake Thomas, really good trio of linebackers there. But ultimately, Devin Leary's banged up. Devin Carter's banged up. I mean, Devin Leary was in a sling during during the end of that football game, Brian. So, like, if he plays, I'd be a little bit surprised. So, give me Syracuse just because I think they're the healthier team right now. If everything was equal and everyone was injury free, I probably lean NC State slightly. But with the state of where everything is after that football game, I will take Syracuse as well in this one.
Just haven't played well. They haven't played to their talent level this year. And as far as their run defense, they gave up 206 yards and 7.4 per carry to Florida State last week. Before that, their run defense was pretty good. They held Clemson to 145, but that was on 38 carries. They held UConn to 121. UConn actually runs the football relatively well, which I think factored into wasn't that your prediction for this week, Ryan? Was UConn?
UConn's offensive line is actually pretty solid, man. It's not bad, which is surprising for a team that isn't very good. But I think that was my upset pick. Is I had UConn. It was a weird line, Brian. We want to talk about weird lines.
9.5
Ball State, but Ball State's favored by 9.5. I was like, okay. Well, I'm gonna take UConn definitely to cover that, but I think UConn wins outright against Ball State. So
was UConn's not very good, but you know who else isn't very good? Ball State. You know what I mean? So it's like, okay, whatever. But their rush defense has been pretty good this year outside of that. Held Texas Tech to 54 yards on 26 carries. Again, they don't really run it a ton, but that's still a good performance. I'm taking Syracuse in this game. I think they're going to shut NC State down. NC State's offense has been mediocre all year with Devin Leary banged up. Even if he plays, I don't like this matchup for NC State. I'm taking Syracuse. It's a big game for Notre Dame too, because if Syracuse wins this game, they're all but guaranteed to be in the top 25 when Notre Dame plays them. Because they're 18 now. They're undefeated. They beat a ranked NC State team at home. They have a they have a bye week, and then they have Clemson, then a bye week.
Okay.
So if you go out and you're able to, and for whatever reason, it's the craziest thing. In the last 5 years, the team that has given Clemson the biggest problems in the regular season has been Syracuse. They beat them in 2017, almost beat them in 2018. And even in 2019, they had them down in the second half, like 27-21 in the second half, and Clemson rallied back to win. I don't know what it is about Dino, but he's able to play well. But even if Clemson wins convincingly in that game, Ryan, you're going to have a 6-1 Syracuse team hosting Notre Dame. Actually, no, I'm sorry. They do not have a bye week before Notre Dame. They play this week, then they play Clemson next week, then they host Notre Dame the 29th. So you win this game, you're 6-0. You lose to Clemson at Clemson. You're 6-1. You're still ranked in the top 25 before you host Notre Dame. That's good for Notre Dame. Mm-hmm. And it's also the week before the college football playoff rankings come out. And that's all I'm going to say about that. It's just, it's going to be interesting to see how that kind of goes. And not because I think Notre Dame's going to get to the playoff. It's more about how high can Notre Dame rise to get to a major bowl game is why that matters. Because there's two reasons why the college football playoff rankings matter. One is to get to the playoff, but the other one is you got to position yourself to be where they can justify bringing you in for a major bowl game. Because it's harder for Notre Dame because of the lack of conference affiliation. So that's why, just so people understand why we're bringing up the conference playoff or college football playoff rankings, it's not because we think Notre Dame's got a shot at being a 2-loss college football playoff team. Could that happen? I guess. I mean, anything can happen, but it would have to be insane stuff for that to happen. Move forward. It's more about the New Year's Six Bowl stuff is where we're coming from. And then we were asked about one other game, Ryan, and we were just asked this one. Two teams that are coming off losses. One team is struggling. One team just lost to another really good team. Arkansas at BYU. What say you, Mr. Roberts, before we go on to the mailbag?
I mean, initial thought is Arkansas in this one, just because I think Arkansas has had a couple down games, pretty recently. So it's kind of like I don't want to call it a get-right game, but there's just something where I just think that Arkansas is a well-coached football team, and they have not lived up to expectation in the last couple weeks. So I think that they might fight back adversity and come out with a big victory in against BYU. It's funny, again, there are two teams that have talent in certain spots, but have kind of underperformed at times this year. But I think I would take Arkansas, Brian. I just think that Notre Dame ran really well against BYU. I think that Arkansas can do a little bit of the same, right? Rocket Sanders is obviously a dynamic runner. If KJ Jefferson is just moderately healthy, even if he's not, because Malik Hornsby is not a great quarterback, but he's a really good athlete, so he can run the football a ton. I think that they'll be able to run the ball a little bit on BYU. So I would pick Arkansas probably in a tight contest there.
It's really intriguing, Ryan, because you have a Arkansas team that's really good at running the football against a BYU team that's not very good at stopping the run. But the counter to that is you have a Arkansas defense that struggles to stop the pass game against a BYU offense that's pretty good at throwing the football. And they're going to be pissed off. And they just played the best secondary they've played all year. The Arkansas secondary is going to look like a bunch of nothing compared to what they had to face last week. That's going to be the interesting thing is that dichotomy of which part of that strength versus weakness can play better. And that's going to make it interesting. And KJ's just got to protect the football. I'm actually going with BYU this week, Ryan. I'm gonna go with I think if BYU would have played better against Notre Dame, I would say, like, if they would have just played their butts off and Notre Dame was just better, made a play at the end to win it, and they're kind of heartbroken, I'd go with Arkansas because that emotional letdown. I think these BYU kids are going to look at the way they played against Notre Dame, and usually competitive kids don't look at a game like that and think, oh, gee, they just outplayed us. They usually think like, gee, if we would have done this, this, or this. In reality, that's not the case. But I think they're going to have that mentality, and I think Arkansas is reeling a little bit. And, the interesting thing is, they battled against A&M and lost late. They battled back from Bama. What Bama did to them in the fourth quarter, I think kind of rocked them a little bit. Because the thing about Arkansas in 2021, Ryan, is with the exception of the Georgia game early, all of their losses were really competitive games, where they were in it for a while. Ole Miss was that way. The Bama game was that way. Then they beat Penn State in the bowl game. They had that just really close, heartbreaking loss to A&M. Bama rolled them in the fourth quarter, and then they came out against Mississippi State last week and got annihilated by Mississippi State. And, I mean, Mississippi State even ran for 173 yards on them. And that's the interesting thing because their rush defense the first 3 games of the year looked pretty good. Shut in Cincinnati down, shut down South Carolina, held them to 40 yards, held Cincinnati 113. A&M went for 192. Alabama went for 317. And Mississippi State ran for 173 yards. For context, people, that's like Notre Dame rushing for 350. Is that a fair thing to say, Ryan? Them rushing for 173 yards. I mean, the 5 games before, they went for 97, 106, 75, 45, and 144. That's what Mississippi State did on the ground in the games before that. Last year, Mississippi State's 2 highest rushing outputs were 107 against Tennessee State and 115 against LSU. Okay, so yeah.
So they've been running the ball better this year. Good for Mississippi
The year
State.
before that, they had 2 games over 100 yards the year before that. 151 against Missouri, 123 against Tulsa. So yeah, going out and running for $173 is pretty good. But you're correct. They went for 144 against A&M in a win, and then 173 against Arkansas. So it's going to be it's going to be a very interesting game. I am personally picking BYU, and obviously for Notre Dame, it's good that if BYU wins this game. If Notre Dame can say, "Hey, look, we beat this team pretty good. They beat Baylor. They came back home a week after they played us, and they beat Arkansas, an SEC team." That's certainly a good resume builder for Notre Dame. So maybe my prediction's a little bit of wishful thinking for Notre Dame, a little bit perhaps there, but I think that it's based on analysis. I'm going to take the team that I think is emotionally going to be a little bit more prepared to play this game. And honestly, how excited are Arkansas kids going to be to play BYU?
Never know. It's a good point. It's a good point. Mike Leach adopting the power running game, man. Good for him. Power eye, little double tight. Love it, baby.
Yeah.
There you go, Mikey.
So that's going to do it for our college football predictions for this week. There's so many other games because I really would thought about let's talk about Duke, North Carolina. Let's talk about. There's so many other games we could talk about, like the Miami, Virginia Tech, I believe, is another game that I saw this week that really interests me. That I thought about discussing. Auburn, Ole Miss is going to be interesting from the standpoint of if Ole Miss does to Auburn what I think they can do to Auburn. Is this the end of Brian Harsin? There's that storyline because I believe Auburn has a bye next week, Ryan, which would make this the perfect time to replace a coach if you so desire. Iowa State at Texas. Does Texas have the Oklahoma beatdown hangover at home against an Iowa State team that's kind of but playing for their seasons? Miami 2-3 going to Virginia Tech, who's 2-4. Two first-year coaches looking to salvage their seasons. I'm just looking down the schedule. Maryland at Indiana is an intriguing Big Ten game for 2 teams that need a win. Wisconsin at Michigan State. That's my upset of the week. Wisconsin is a 7-point favorite. I think people forgot about how bad they looked before they played Northwestern, and they are not good. That was my upset pick. Arizona at Washington. How does Washington bounce back after their win? So, we didn't even talk about a game between 2 ranked opponents, Ryan. 16 Mississippi State at number 22 Kentucky. So that just tells you how good the weekend is. I know a lot of people are very intrigued by the Nebraska-Purdue game. And here's a sneaky battle of 2 quality football teams this year. 4-2 Washington State at 4-2 Oregon State. That's going to be another interesting one. So lot of good games there, Ryan. A lot of good games. It's mailbag time, Ryan, and we're going to kind of rock and roll through these. We talked a lot about – that was fun. I don't know if you enjoyed that. I enjoyed that very much.
I hated every second of it.
Yeah, see, why can't you just ever be serious? You always got to have the sarcasm.
This is all right. I enjoyed that. I've only done sarcasm like 3 times today. Cut me a little slack.
Ryan.
It's been like 3 times.
I'm going to make you go back and watch the show, and you're going to realize that that's a lot more than that. It's all good, though. But I enjoyed the show, even if Ryan didn't. That was a really good breakdown of a lot of really, really good games. So we're going to get in the mailbag time now. We're going to start off with Kevin Park. Kevin Park asked, just curious if Golden's defense is too complicated. Freeman is the head coach. Why can't he tell him to simplify it? I think a lot of times we assume that doesn't happen. But, that's kind of the approach that Marcus Freeman took last year too, though. He put a lot on them early, created a lot of mistakes. They gave up a lot of big plays early. But what happened? Around week 7, the defense figured it out and started playing really well down the stretch, despite playing some good offenses later in the year as well, Ryan. So I think that's kind of the approach they're taking, right or wrong, is, look, we're here now. Let's keep at it, and these kids are going to figure it out. I think that's the approach they're taking. I don't know if I like it, but I think that's the approach they're taking.
And also, Brian, like you said, it was a little bit of an adjustment period for Marcus Freeman early on in his, Notre Dame career as a defensive coordinator. So I think he understands that, hey, this might take a little bit for Al to get everything fully to where he wants and to get the thing rolling the right way, right? So I think there's a very good balance there, Kevin, right? Because coaches have those conversations, right? Like they do. They have those conversations, but I think that there is a patience that needs to happen with the first-year coordinator, right? So I think that there's a balance that needs to happen, but I do think that it's something to keep in mind for sure moving forward.
Next question is from Hulk Strongest. Thank you, Hulk Strongest. What's up, guys? How big of a difference would Kevin Austin have made if he came back? I think a big one. And you have a legitimate vertical weapon W to put in the boundary. Yeah, that'd have made a huge difference.
You wouldn't have
with good coaching.
figure. I mean, we've been pleading for more size right into the boundary for Notre Dame all year, right? Whether it is Tobias Merriweather getting a lot more touches, whether it is Deion Colsey getting some touches when he's fully healthy, right? Like you've missed that element to your game. So if Kevin came back, you'd be like, all right, I had a near 900-yard receiver from last year that is 6'3", has some speed. It's a kind of an easy throw into the boundaries. So I think that's kind of what you've been missing. So yeah, and then another year also, Brian, like we talked about it kind of the offseason. It would have been nice for Kevin to come back for another year to just craft his game. Because, I mean, there's a reason he went UDFA despite being a great athlete, right? So I think it would have been beneficial for both sides, but unfortunately, that's not how it worked out. So
not at all. Definitely, unfortunately. So let's get back to some more. Hawk Strongest also said, hey, Ryan, heard rumors that a certain 5-star quarterback is having second thoughts. I want to go down. There was another question about that. People asking about the latest with Jackson Arnold. Ryan, let's just quickly clear that up. I'm going to take this one if you don't mind.
Yeah, go for
it. I've tried to tell people, stop following troll accounts on Twitter. Okay? They either make stuff up or steal other people's information. B, has Notre Dame been talking to Jackson Arnold? Yes. They've been talking to Jackson Arnold for a while. Would Notre Dame like for Jackson Arnold to visit? Yes. Did Jackson Arnold consider visiting despite what he has told some Oklahoma people? Yes. However, I think part of that was more about going with a friend of his to a big game. I don't think Jackson has really thought a lot about flipping. Any hope that Notre Dame had was that if this stayed quiet. That was the only hope Notre Dame was going to have, is if it stayed quiet. But the fact that it's out now, Oklahoma is now on alert, that Notre Dame is still talking to them, and that's going to make it a lot harder. But even if it had stayed quiet, the odds of Notre Dame flipping Jackson Arnold were incredibly small. It was never a real thing that we were concerned about. So that we thought was an option. Even if he visited, it would have been unlikely. It would have reminded me a lot of the Walker Howard situation last year, Ryan. Visited because he's got a good relationship with Tommy Rees. The odds of him flipping, not very good. And that's what we said about that one last year as well. So anything you'd like to add to this situation, Ryan?
Just that I don't think that Notre Dame's definitely not hyper focusing on just Jackson Arnold either, right? Like we've mentioned a couple names already. There's they're expanding their board, and we'll be, I'm sure, giving you guys a little bit of a peek into that pretty soon. But Notre Dame is making this more of a widespread effort to figure out their 2023 quarterback. At one point, it was let's focus on one guy. They didn't get that guy. All right, let's focus on another. It's kind of becoming more of a widespread mission to find a quarterback. So it's definitely not hyper-focused on Jackson Arnold. Like Brian said, have they done their due diligence on that part? Yeah, I think so, right? But have they done their due diligence with Avery Johnson to try to see if he's interested? Yes, they have. But at some point, I believe that this board is going to expand a little bit, and we'll see where it goes from here.
We have a super chat from David Knight, our guy David Knight, who's also one of the OGs of the Irish Breakdown message board chat. He says, Brian and Ryan, do you think when you have a brand new coaching staff or even largely a new staff, it takes some time for them to create that footprint of success? However, in some cases, it can largely be successful CW first year. Yeah, I think there does, because you've got to learn the players. Coaches have to learn players. This is what it wasn't an excuse. No, it was a justification for why the defense was a little inconsistent last year. It was, you have a new head coach, a new defensive coordinator that's learning what his guys do well and don't do well. And you're seeing that with a lot of the assistant coaches this year. Plus, I don't think people realize how the schedule's been very challenging so far. I mean, some of the stuff that you had, kinks you got to work out. If you're starting with, Akron in game 1 and then Marshall game 2, you're probably looking a little bit different because you're not spending the entire offseason on Ohio State the way they did. You don't have the emotional letdown in week 2 the way that you did. You have a game to kind of build up and get ready for a quality Marshall team. Then Cal's a good football team. North Carolina's a good football team. BYU's a good football team. So it means is some of the warts that weren't exposed against Michigan. Like, so the whole, we don't know who Michigan is. Why they haven't played anybody yet? Right? That's not the case. If Notre Dame would have started their season off with Colorado State and UConn and Hawaii, Ryan, they'd be 3-0 and blowing people out. I mean, that's just the reality of it. So the schedule's been challenging, but yes, I do think, Ryan, that there does take some time for that blueprint to because what happens is, and I've heard this, I've heard from sources about some of the veterans when things don't go the way that they think they should go. Well, this is how Coach Kelly would have done it. That's what happens when you replace a coach who won. Is even the players that didn't like him say, "Well, I didn't like him, but what he did work." They fall for that stuff too. I think it's taken some time to build that out, break that out of them a little bit as well, Ryan. And that's it. It makes it especially challenging when you don't have success early on. And that's 100%. What has made some of these most recent games very important.
I think more often than not, Brian, because I know, you're talking about, like David mentioned, like the Charlie Weiss's first year, right, where it looked really good early on. For me, it's more often than not, the transition stuff does have its hiccups, right? It does have its kind of bumps in the road. There is a transitional period where you have to instill your blueprint on the program and you have to deprogram a lot of flaws that were already pre-existing, right? So I think that for me, more often than not, David, to the question, I think that a lot of times it does take a little bit of time. It does. I mean, Marcus Freeman wasn't dumped into a terrible situation, but there were still some flaws clearly with the program that he had to try to fix. And moving forward, I think that he has those things in mind. And I think that long-term, it's going to work out very well for Notre Dame. But to your point, there was some early bumps because that usually is the case when there is transitions like that.
Also, with all due respect to Tyler Buckner and Drew Pine, if Brady Quinn was Notre Dame's quarterback, they're 5-0 right now. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, he was a guy that had started the 2 previous years. Parts of his freshman year and then his whole sophomore year. He'd been through some of those lumps. He was always a talented kid that was playing in a garbage offense. If you'd have had a junior year version of Brady Quinn on this team, you'd be undefeated right now. I mean, at worst 4-1. So, I mean, that factors too. So the circumstances, David, are always good. And what that means, David, is sometimes you can have certain parts of your team that are good enough to overcome some of those bumps. Right. And that's what Brady Quinn was. He was that kind of neutralizer of some of those things. Milton Fan 15 says, Brian, the question about the big announcement you are doing Sunday, is it related to Notre Dame or specific to IB?
You have to wait and see.
No, I'll give you a little tease. It's Notre Dame related. We're not going to have this big get together for me to announce a new hire that I'm making, right? Like that would be such a, I would boo myself if it was something like that.
Brian signs Ryan to a lifetime contract.
Yes. If it was something like that, like you guys would deserve to boo me. No, this is a different kind of announcement that we're excited to make. And I'm not going to say anything beyond that, but no, this is not, it's specific to IB in that it's our show and it's going to be fun and we're going to have some fun with the announcement. But yeah, it's not an Irish breakdown announcement about something about our company, if that's kind of what you're referring to. So we'll be talking about Notre Dame that day. So good question. I think because you're Milton fan, you're probably not the only person that has that question. So it's good to get that out there. Scott Yerbick, question for the mailbag. Which of the 3 running backs do you think will have the best overall productive season, total TDs, total yards, etc.? I think total yards is probably going to be Chris Tyree. Touchdowns, I would think Audric Estime.
That was my initial thought. Yeah.
Which is pretty much where we were preseason. We both thought that Chris Tyree would have the most total yards and Estime would have the most touchdowns. I'm still there at this point. I mean, I don't see that changing. Ryan,
did you, in the preseason, did you have Tyree or Estime with the most rushing yards? Did we talk about that? I can't remember.
Yeah, I went Tyree with the most yards, but he'd have it on fewer carries.
Gotcha.
Yep. But I also anticipated him not being on the bench the first 2 games of the year or at least not on the bench, but like not getting touches for the first 2 games of the year.
That's very true. It has played out pretty solidly to what we were predicting in the preseason. That in the run game wise,
Estimate's more on pace for the yards thing, but that's because of how they're using him to kind of just wear teams out late in the games. But it still didn't make a whole lot of sense to me, to be completely honest with you. But see all purpose. Let's go here. Let's see total yards. So and we'll see. We'll see how it plays out. But that's still how I see it. David Knight says, "Did Jason Onye see the field, or is it that maybe next year?" It's still too early for me to say no. It's too early for me to say no because they're an injury away now from him needing to play. That's just the reality of it. And you just never know with a kid like that, who I think is talented. I think Jason is a talented kid. He's just a raw kid. And the COVID year set him back, Ryan, because you got to remember, he'd only played football for like 2 years. And as a junior, he breaks out, and only the second year he's ever played football. He went to Bishop Hendricken to play basketball. And then they convinced him to play football. He has like 17 sacks as a junior, and he leads them to a state championship. And you watch him play, like, this kid's got a lot of upside. He needed his senior year of football, and then he didn't play because of the COVID stuff. So that set him back a year. I think if he would have been able to play his senior year, he might be in a position to be in a rotation this year. So he's just got to be patient, let it play out, because I think he's got a chance. And I've heard a lot of good things about him from my sources in Notre Dame. They really like him. He flashes. It's just a consistency thing, which comes from just not having a lot of experience. I mean, he's only really played 3 seasons of football in his life, so I think he's just still learning and evolving, but he's a really athletic kid. He's really long. I think he's going to have a chance to be a player at Notre Dame, and maybe it's this year. Maybe one of two things could happen this year, right? One, the light just goes on. He starts dominating in practice, and you start playing him more, right? Or two, and another injury happens that's more long-term, a guy that's going to be out 3 or 4 games, and then you have to play him, and you have to start getting him some reps. So, because they've already lost 2 guys from their defensive line for the year. Aiden Kaunana got hurt in the spring. He's out for the year, and then Jacob Lacey quit. So that's now 2 guys that you were expecting to be somewhat of a factor for you in some capacity. So they're one more injury away from, in my opinion, having to play him a lot more. Next year, however, to what Ryan said, is where I expect for him to be a part of the rotation because of his performance, not so much because of there being injuries. I think he's a kid that could be hard to keep off the field next season. I really do.
Yeah. I mean, because God-given ability, right? Like 6'5", 290 plus, long arms, athletic. Like, there's a lot especially in this system, man. That's a one-gap penetration style system. Jason Onye can create some problems potentially with his athleticism. It's raw right now, but be patient with him.
Absolutely. Let's go to the next question. Oh, we actually had a super chat I wanted to get down here too real quick from Tyler Evans. Thank you, Tyler. Who do you think is having buyer's remorse with their new head coach this year? That's a good question.
Venables right now, right? Oklahoma's got to have some remorse.
Yeah. I don't know if LSU – I mean, like Stephen A. Smith said his thing this week. Did you hear what he said about Brian Kelly and what he's hearing about it? He says, and a lot of Notre Dame fans jumped on that. Like, he's saying, I'm hearing nothing good about him. Players don't like him. Administration doesn't like him. And I'm thinking, okay, that might mean more to me if like someone I knew that actually like covered football was saying that, not just some dude that's on a show where they talk about things he's not qualified to talk about.
If Stephen A. had some basketball insight, I would listen to it. But football, I'm all right. I'm all right. Yeah.
So and it's ESPN. So like I don't put a lot of stock. I mean, would it shock me? No, but I don't put a lot of stock in that, honestly. And again, when you walk into a situation like he walked into, where a program that has no discipline, I would imagine that those kids who were undisciplined and were allowed to do whatever they wanted don't like him very much. And so I'm sure people don't like him. I don't think LSU's having buyer's remorse right now. Maybe some fans are, but that's just how fans are. I don't think LSU is having buyer's remorse at this point in time. I think when you look at others, Ryan, I mean, I don't think Florida's having that. I mean, look, I actually think Florida's kind of lucky to be 4-2 right now, and I don't think Napier's doing a great job, but I don't think he's doing a bad job. You look at some of the other coaches, guys that are first year coaches. I mean, Miami's underachieved in my opinion. I think they've underachieved. But am I having buyer's remorse? No, because I'm like, look at what he's doing on the recruiting trail. I mean, he's doing some really good things on the recruiting trail. Dan Lanning, I mean, after that blowout loss to Georgia, I mean, after the first game, I'd have been like, what have we got ourselves into? This team was woefully unprepared. But have you seen Oregon since they played Georgia?
Been playing well.
They look really good. They look really good. I mean, and here's why that matters. You have a young 30-something-year-old coach whose team got embarrassed on national TV in their first game, and they immediately emotionally bounced back from that. That impresses me because they haven't really beat a lot of good teams, Ryan. It's the way they're beating people. That they bounced back the way they did was impressive to me. Dan Lanning, so he, like I said, done a good job. Brent Venables is the one for me for sure. Mike Elko at Duke done a great job. I've got one for you. Brent Pry walked into a bad situation at Virginia Tech. Sonny Dykes has done a great job. Joey McGuire, Texas Tech has won a lot of games, but you got to be proud of the way
they're competitive.
Yes,
competitive. Yeah,
they are very competitive. Kalen DeBoer's done a great job. Lincoln Riley's, they're undefeated.
Good job.
Jake Dickert at Washington State, they're doing a really good job. Notre Dame's happy with Marcus Freeman. Here's one I got for you. Here's a team that I think is having major buyer's remorse right now. Virginia.
Who would have thought? That Tony Elliott? Yeah.
Now that's where sarcasm is appropriate, Ryan, because it was so easy to see. Right, so easy to see.
It was those were one of those hires where you're just like, that is not going to end well, and it's not going very well right now, because that for me, like, that had to be more of a short term, even more than a long term hire, right? Because you had some pieces back offensively where you're like, they can be competitive.
You have a lot of your pieces back.
Yeah,
you lost your center and you're an offensive lineman, but you've turned Brandon Armstrong into a mediocre football player.
And last year he was one of the best quarterbacks in the ACC and nationally for statistically. Like, he was playing phenomenal football. And you're like, okay, if you guys can just get it figured out a little bit in year one, right? Offensive line's a little better, defense gets a little better. Then you're like a 8-win team,
7-8-win team in a bowl game.
Right. But no, they're bad. They're a bad football team. So that's a good one.
I mean, dude, they're not going to make a bowl game this year, Ryan. I don't see it.
They're bad.
I don't see them making a bowl game this year. I mean, they stink. I mean, they're 2-4 right now. They have a 17-point win over Richmond and a 2-point win over Old Dominion. Game you should have lost. They were competitive in their first two losses. I mean, one of their first two losses. Illinois beat them 24-3. They lost to Syracuse 22-20. The game they had a chance to win. Then they got stomped at Duke, and then at home, they got stomped at Louisville at home without Malik Cunningham.
So bad, man.
They play at Georgia Tech next week. I think it's a Thursday night game. They're off this week. They play at Georgia Tech next week on a Thursday. Then they have 4 straight home games against Miami, North Carolina, Pittsburgh, and Coastal Carolina. Then they play at Virginia Tech. Virginia hasn't beaten Virginia Tech in, let me look this up. It's been a long time, Ryan, since they've beat them. Like, I think they won a game recently. Let me look this up. Yeah, they won in 2019. The previous win over Virginia, but the last time Virginia won, besides the 2019 game, was 2003. So that's Brady Quinn's freshman year. They're not beating Virginia Tech at Virginia Tech this year, even with as bad as Virginia Tech is. So I'm like, they're not making a bowl game this year. In order to make a bowl game, they have to win four games against a schedule that consists of Georgia Tech on the road, who is 3-3 right now.
Won 2 straight games after Jeff Collins was let go.
Miami, North Carolina, Pitt, undefeated Coastal Carolina, and then a road game against Virginia Tech, who has beaten Virginia who Virginia has defeated once since the end of Brady Quinn's freshman year of college.
Wow.
Right? So, and that's not like it's misleading. They don't play every year. Yeah, they play every year. Right? Like, they play every year. So that they are terrible. They have to have buyer's remorse. Yes, and Georgia Tech beat Pitt on the road and Virginia and Duke at home in their 2 games since they fired Jeff Collins. Those are 2 good wins.
That is 2 good wins. Yeah.
So no one else is close in that conversation, man.
University of Virginia, give me a call next time. I'll tell you if your hire is going to be good or not, because I could have told you Tony Elliott was a bad one.
Everybody could have told him that.
Everybody
could have told him that.
But I want the clout for telling him it.
Yeah. So. Tyler Evans as Super Chat, Illinois versus Minnesota, Purdue versus Nebraska. Tyler, we talked about Illinois, Minnesota already. Purdue, Nebraska is an interesting one, Ryan, because they did not win their first game after they fired their coach. We kind of had that conversation about Oklahoma, Nebraska. Does Nebraska come out and play well after they fired their coach? And you're like, nope, they didn't. They got blown out. However, they have won their 2 games since then. They beat Indiana by 2 touchdowns, and they rallied back from they were down 10-0 against Rutgers, I think, wasn't it?
Yep.
And rallied back and won. That's not a game Scott Frost coach team wins. Now, I don't think they're going to go on the road and beat Purdue. They had an ugly
I
road
don't
win
either.
over Rutgers. And
Yeah.
Indiana's not really very good, to be honest with you. But the Nebraska defense is playing better since they fired Scott Frost's buddy, who was their defensive coordinator. So I think Purdue, when Aiden O'Connell's healthy, is a quality football team this year. They are.
Yeah.
This is one of Jeff Brom's best coaching jobs, because I didn't think Purdue was going to be sitting here at 4-2 with a chance to be at 5-2 with a win over Nebraska at 5-2. When you look at what they lost last year, losing David Bell, losing George Karlaftis, I just didn't see them being as good as they've been. With a 4-point loss to Penn State and a 3-point loss to Syracuse, their only two losses were to two undefeated teams so far, right?
Well, Brian, I don't think anybody's given this enough credit. Purdue also lost Milton Wright before the season, who was supposed to be their best receiver coming back.
Right.
Can we talk about the job that Jeff Brom has done utilizing Charlie Jones, who was like a 20 catch guy at Iowa, and then all of a sudden he's
when Notre Dame was looking at him, we're like, look, he's primarily a punt returner, maybe playing rotation. He's been better than anybody Notre Dame's had so far this year.
Oh, easy. He's one of the leading receivers in college football. It's nuts, man. It's nuts. So,
he has done a great job with this football team. There's no doubt about it. TJ Sheffield having a nice year, which I really like. I still always feel terrible about how his recruitment thing happened and how Dell did him dirty and the way that whole thing went down. But he's found success, and I love it for the kid. But yeah, Charlie Jones through 6 games has 50 catches for 603 yards and 7 touchdowns, Ryan. Here's what he did at Iowa. Last year, 21 catches for 323 yards. Year before that, he had 0 catches. Year before that, he had 18 catches for 395 yards. So he's surpassed his career catch numbers, and he's already close to surpassing his career reception numbers in 6 games. So
it's nuts, man.
Yeah.
Charlie Jones is going to catch almost 100 passes this year.
Smartest kid in college football. Think about what he walked away from and what he walked into.
Oh, I didn't even think about that, man. He'd be part of the dumpster fire right now offensively. Oh, God.
Yes.
He's like
smartest career move ever made by a college football
to get away from Spencer Petras and go with Aiden O'Connell. Yeah, you're very, very correct.
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
God.
Oh, my gosh. It's so bad. So bad. Let's get to some more questions here. Irish blooded. What are the chances? What is the percentage chance with a healthy late lead that we see Angeli in a limited package with the Bees this week? I hope we see Angeli. He needs to play this week.
I'd be disappointed if we didn't.
Play, Ryan. Yeah.
I'd be disappointed if we don't see him, if we're being honest. Like if we don't see Steve Angeli in this game, it probably tells me that my prediction was very wrong this week, right? So I think we need to see him, to your point.
Because just for those who may not know, the new rule is you can play 4 games and still preserve a year of eligibility. You only do that once, but unless it's a medical. But so he's, as a freshman, still has that opportunity here. Here's an interesting question, Ryan, and I think I know what your answer is going to be. Hulk Strongest asked, if Tanner McKee was to enter, that's Stanford's quarterback, for those who don't know, if Tanner McKee was to enter the portal next year, should Notre Dame go after him?
Yes, I believe so. I mean, I think, look, Tanner McKee is a talented kid. There's no doubt, right? Like he's a big kid, strong arm, everything's there. It's just about, he's been put in a bad situation. And if Notre Dame's offensive line can be as good as we think it can be next year, I think Tanner McKee could be really good in the offense, right? But regardless, I'm not bringing Tanner McKee in to just give him the starting job. He's coming in to compete. He has to know that. Yep. But, I would take Tanner McKee for sure.
As long as he was willing to battle, he's going to have Blake Fisher and Joe Alt protect him on the outside. Zeke Correll comes back next year. You've got some very young, talented guards ready to step in. Their whole receiving core basically comes back except for maybe Braden Lindsey. You're going to have a great freshman receiving core coming in. You're going to have all your running backs come back. You lose Michael Mayer, but if any team is in a situation to handle losing Michael Mayer and still be good at tight end, not as good as Michael Mayer, but good at tight end, it's Notre Dame. And so, he would do very well there. I think Ryan's point was phenomenal. I don't care if it's a kid that I like Tyler Van Dyke, or a kid that you like the kid from Georgia Tech, Sims. You're going to know you're coming in here to compete. You're not being handed the job. And that's a big part of it. So if he was willing to do that, sure. The question would be, why would he do that? unless he's like looking at it saying, hey, I'm going to get I'm worried. Here's why he would consider it. I'm worried about my health playing behind this offensive line. That's a legitimate thing because they're going to lose a couple of those guys, right? Aren't Hinton might have another year left, but I think Rouse is done after this year.
Yeah. Yep.
And if you're Hinton, that's like, oh no, if that makes a lot of sense for you.
You're also, and to the injury part of everything, potentially staying safe, but also they're going to be losing Michael Wilson, Elijah Higgins, like Ben Urasek, maybe, who knows?
Possibly.
Like,
yeah. That's not a good situation. So I'd look into it. I'd look into it. There could be some guys in the portal this year, but we'll have to see how it is. But since someone asked specifically about a player, I'll answer that way.
You want to hear something crazy about quarterbacks?
Sure.
I found out yesterday, and I didn't know this actually, which I probably should have. Do you know that Devin Leary and Sam Hartman both have an extra year of eligibility still?
Sam Hartman has a 7th year? How?
No, it's only going to be his 6th year. It's going to be his 6th year.
Are you sure?
They're both 2018 kids. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, because he's played all 5 years, right?
I think
he started as a freshman.
But then he
started against Notre Dame as a freshman. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to look this up. Did he get hurt that next year?
No, I think they just redshirted. I think they redshirted him because they had Jamie Newman, right? Okay. I think that's what happened.
He played 4 games in 2019.
Yeah.
So, that kid's already got over 10,000 career passing yards. He's going to be well over that mark. If he comes back next, Phil Jurkovic's another guy that's got a 6 year of eligibility left. There's a lot of those type of kids next year that's going to be, and he's another kid that he's not coming to Notre Dame. But he's a kid that may want to consider if you're going to play another year, you need to do it somewhere else.
Yes.
Because your health is more important than playing football. And he's played behind 2 of the 3 worst offensive lines I've ever seen BYU have. Because the 2020 offensive line was pretty awful as well. It really was really bad. Because remember, that was the year they were like moving dudes all over the place, and like they moved like Petrula from center to tackle. It was just a mess.
It's a shame that he got hurt last year because he probably would have ended up with a really nice year last year behind that offensive line.
Yep, absolutely. Matt Lee says Irish need to throw the ball around more to others Saturday because Clemson USC will down the road be able to double team Mayer and take him away. Yeah, Matt, we talked a little bit about that yesterday. I think that's a really good observation. I think that you've got to put some stuff on tape to make teams say you can't just take that kid out of the way. But even more importantly, no matter what your receivers do, they may still say, hey, we're going to take Mayer out. You need to make sure you're instilling the confidence in your receivers that when those Clemson, like the first game you build around your receivers can't be Clemson. It can't be USC. It's got to be now. I think it's a really good observation, Matt. Jay has a question. Ryan, here's one for you. Who else can't wait to watch Oklahoma lose to Kansas tomorrow? Peyton Bowen ain't going to that dumpster fire. I love that. I just had to get that there. But the question was this one from Brandon. Is Peyton Bowen planning on being an early enrollee?
Yes, to my knowledge. It's a crazy list, Brian, because there is a lot of kids that are planning on early enrolling already, to my knowledge. And that's not even going through everyone. Like, I know for a fact that Jaden Greathouse is going to enroll early. I know Jaden Lamar's planning on it as long as everything works out. Christian Gray will be early enrolling. Don Schuler will be early enrolling. I think Jay Nosberry will be early enrolling. There's a lot of guys on, and if Notre Dame gets Jeremiah Love in this recruiting class, he's definitely going to be enrolling early. Braylon James, there's a lot of potential early enrollees for Notre Dame next year, man. It's going to be interesting to watch because I feel like it's going to be a very huge early enrollee class in 2023.
Absolutely. Let's go to some more here, Ryan. We had a question down here that I wanted to get to as well. This is in relation to the conversation we just had about buyer's remorse. And this is the question from Tommy Guns. It's his birthday. So when Tommy, asks birthday questions, we've got to answer them for him, He says, do you think Michigan State is having buyer's remorse with that contract to Mel Tucker? I have 2 thoughts on this, but I want to let you answer first, Ryan.
What is the contract details exactly? I'm trying to remember what they were.
He got like $10 million a year.
Is that what it was?
Yeah, it was an insane contract. Yeah, it was. Wow. Let's see here, $95 million over 10 years, fully guaranteed. So
that's yes,
yeah,
then yes, Tommy. In that instance,
yeah,
absolutely. If that's fully guaranteed, because this is the problem with what Michigan State did last year, right? They had a great season. They hit on a couple of transfer kids. We talked about Kenneth Walker, obviously, who became a second round pick to Seattle. The problem is, though, is that when you go that route, it's immediate success, but we're talking about the long-term effects of a football team, right? Can you recruit and develop freshmen coming into your program and
it's
really
Charlie Weiss
set
all
up
over
that
again.
pipeline? Yeah,
Charlie Weiss all over again.
that is what it
That's
feels
what it
like.
is.
That is what
Except
it
they
feels like.
doubled it up. They paid him twice as much for twice as long. Ryan,
Yeah.
yeah. Here's and for a coach who had been 5-7 and 2-5 in his 2 previous years as a head coach. I mean, the guy came into last year with a 7-12 career record, 5-11 in conference. Yeah, he did a great job of that team last year. But yes, you do not give a guy that big of a contract. Because here's the thing. If some team's willing to throw that kind of money at him, then sometimes it's like Major League Baseball. The best GMs are the ones that are willing to let a guy walk. And that's like, dude, let the guy walk, because if you pay him that much money, he won't live up to that contract because he's not that good, or it's a young guy and he hasn't proven that he can sustainably do that. It's like you always say, don't ever give a contract to the guy who had his career year in a contract year. You know what I mean? Because there's kind of a reason for that, right?
Albert Hainsworth proved that in the NFL.
Yes, just like you don't give a big contract to a quarterback that came off the bench for 4 games and played well as the backup with no pressure. You don't, like Scott Mitchell back in the day. You remember that one?
How dare you insult Doug Johnson like that?
I know, right?
Scott Mitchell, former Utah great Scott Mitchell.
Yeah.
I gotcha.
So it's like you don't give a coach after one good year, just like Notre Dame had no business giving Charlie Weiss that contract. You know what I mean? And I knew at the time, you think, hey, it makes sense. The NFL is going to come after him. Then let him walk, right? I mean, you just got to be able to do that sometimes. And so with Mel Tucker, I think the second part of this too is be careful about teams that have the breakout with all the transfers. Because what we're seeing from them is they lost a lot of kids that came in last year as transfers, and they're a completely different team. They have no continuity, no chemistry, and they're just not as good of a football team because they weren't able to match the incoming volume of talent on the portal like they did the year before. And that's the danger with going the portal route, especially when you're going the portal route with guys who've got 1 year of eligibility left or are in position to be in the NFL after that one season, because it's going to create this with a lot of football teams, Ryan.
Yeah.
And that's why you got to be careful. That's why the portal needs to be an accessory, not your primary driving force of building your roster.
People have called it college football free agency, which is what it is, if we're being completely honest. But the problem is that we also have seen in the NFL that free agency can be very finicky as well, right? Like you hit some years you don't, and you give out way too much and you sacrifice other parts of your roster, right? Like that's what has happened, right? What Mel Tucker did last year was great, but the problem is that I don't think it's sustainable at his level. Right. Like Western Kentucky can do this every year, right? Western Kentucky has been active in the transfer portal the last couple of years, and it's worked out for them. They're at a lower level where that is more sustainable. Playing in the Big Ten Conference, I don't think that's sustainable long-term to be a transfer portal team every year. Don't think it is.
Yep. It's like Mike McIntyre. This is why you don't react. I made this mistake when Mike McIntyre had that great year at Colorado. Hey, this is a guy that's on my radar for the Notre Dame job if it comes open. Because that was like right around 2016 when Kelly had the bad year. And does anyone know where Mike McIntyre is now? I don't. I have no clue where he is coaching now. And it's just kind of why you got to be real careful with kind of diving into it. I'm actually going to look it up now because you know how I am when I hear that. I'm like, okay, I got to know where he is now. He's the head coach at Florida International. He spent after he got fired at Colorado. Yeah. After the 2016 season, because he went similar thing, right? He went 4-8, 2-10, 4-9. And then he has that breakout year at Colorado where they go 10-4, play in the Big 12, Pac-12 championship game. They lost, but they played in it. In the next 2 years, 5-7, 5-6. And then so he got fired there. Then he went to Ole Miss to be the D coordinator in 2019. Then in 2020 and 2021, he was the D coordinator at Memphis. Now he's the head coach at Florida International. And they're 2-3, and that's not a good job.
That year for Colorado, that was when they had that like Loy Fowl kid, right? Like the senior quarterback.
Yes. And he just when he was a lot for them like Skylar Thompson is for Kansas State. He had trouble staying healthy, but when he played, they were tough to beat. I remember they gave Michigan a game. Do you remember that year? They gave Michigan everything they can handle in the big house in that game, and Michigan pulled away late. But that kid just battled his butt off, man. He just didn't have enough horses to really win that game. But he was a really competitive kid. He reminds me a lot of Skylar Thompson as far as what he meant to that football team. But you just got to be careful with those one-year wonders. Make a guy prove it a little bit. And if you have to give a guy $90 million after 1 year to keep him, then you may want to rethink whether or not he's justifying keeping him. And that's no disrespect to Mel Tucker. I'll say that about Charlie. Well, I say that about anybody. You know what I mean? Like it just let the guy go prove himself, right? And otherwise you run into these type of situations, you know? So, and we've all made those mistakes, but yeah, it's a bad spot.
Yep.
Tommy Guns with a question. B. Ryan, who becomes the flagship program in the Big 12? Well, think there's ever going to be just one, right? Most conferences have multiple flagship programs. I mean, Florida State stinks right now, but they're still a flagship program of the ACC, right? I mean, they're really good in every other sport, most other sports, right? And, you know, they're still that team. They're still one of those name brands. Miami is still a name brand. You know, the Pac-12, the Pac-12 is also a big question. But I would say Oklahoma State is part of that, my one. Right? Yeah. I think TCU has a chance to be part of that. Yep. I'm going to tell you a team that could sneakily become a flagship team of the Big 12. You're going to be a little surprised by this. There's two of them. They're both newcomers. And it's not Cincinnati. Houston and BYU.
BYU is a good one. I like the BYU one. Yeah.
I think Houston will be able to recruit really well once they're in the Big 12.
Makes sense. I do. Makes it more appealing to stay at home if you're a Texas kid. And Yep.
But BYU especially. I think BYU tapping into the Texas market a little bit could help them. It really could. But yeah, they're a good football team. And it'll help them get some of the Mormon kids that may otherwise go other places because they're an independent with not a good schedule. I mean, there's they don't get every Mormon kid. But all of a sudden you put them in the Big 12, then maybe some of those kids that are going to Utah or Colorado or Oregon or Washington State or Oregon State, some of those Mormon kids, they now start going to BYU because now BYU is an even more attractive option. That could be part of it too. So it's not just about tapping into the Texas pipeline. It's about getting some of your base that otherwise is going to schools that are not independents that play soft schedules. I think BYU could become in that conversation as well. I really do. Because when they were in the Mountain West with Utah and TCU, those three teams had great battles during those stretches. They really did. Those were some fun. And with Boise, those are some fun years of the Mountain West when Utah, TCU, Boise, and BYU were all in the league together. Some really fun years of that league. Right.
Oklahoma State was my one because I think that I think we underrate how good of a job Mike Gundy's done, you know, because he's like a sound clip, right? Like you just want to keep playing the, you know, I'm a man, I'm 40 stuff, but it's just like he's done a really good job at Oklahoma State, man. Like they are just a consistently competitive, good football team. So
Yep. All right, let's get to some more questions here. Here's one from We Are Not Marshall, Brian and Ryan. Can this be a game that Notre Dame gets far enough ahead to work on some other parts of the offensive playbook with the eye towards tougher competition? No, I don't really think that's kind of how it works. It's not so much far enough ahead. What happens is, in this instance, to your point, because teams will do this, it's more of a, hey, we know we can whip this team, so let's work on a couple things we've been holding off on because it just hasn't, you know, there's this concept we've wanted to do, but it just hasn't been the right week because this team was maybe a better matchup, or we had to do something differently, or maybe we didn't think it would work against them. So you tried out against a Stanford or UNLV. I think there's merit to that, but it's not something where, hey, we're up by 30, let's try this, because you have to practice it. And if you haven't been practicing during the week, then you're not going to run it in the middle of the game. And if you're practicing during the week, then you should be running it with your starting team early as part of your game plan. So I like where your head's at, but I just think it would be something where it wouldn't be something you do because you're up. It'd be something that you're doing just as part of your game plan. Ian Johnson asks, do y'all think Colorado will win a game this year? Boy, that is a really good question. Let's see here. let me look at their schedule because that's kind of part of it as well. I mean, my inkling is to say no because they're really terrible, but they may have some, FCS game coming up down the stretch that I don't know about their schedule. So let's see here. They're 0-5 right now. They play home against Cal this weekend, potentially, but hopefully Cal wins that one. At Oregon State. Let's see here. Home against Arizona State. Let's see here. Hold on one second. Hey, do what you got to do, Ryan. Do what you got to do. Yeah. Yeah. Let's see here. Arizona State at home. That's a potential win because they're a reeling program. Oregon at home. That's a loss. USC on the road, loss. Washington on the road, loss. Utah at home, loss. They've got the next 3 weeks, including this weekend, Ian, is when they're going to have to win one of these next 3 weeks. If they don't win one of these next 3 weeks, they're going to have a hard time winning. Really hard time winning. They're a bad football team, a really bad football team. Matt Lee with a question. Brian and Ryan, didn't Stanford just lose another offensive lineman going into this game, which will hurt them even more if true? Matt, you've made 2 really good comments today, but they're things we addressed yesterday. So I would encourage you to go back and listen to yesterday's show, not so that you can have knowledge of it because you're already thinking about those things, but so we can break down what those things mean. They're getting Miles Hinton back, so they're getting an offensive lineman back, but then they're losing Walter Rouse, who got hurt last week, and they're also losing Jay Cornerbrook. So they're not losing another in that they're out of who's already out. Hinton's coming back this week is what they're saying. So they're losing 2 different guys for this game. Their entire left side of their offensive line is really an issue. We're going to get to a couple more here before I got to get out of here. Ryan had some family stuff he had to get taken care of. So some stuff that came up suddenly. So everything's all good. But that's why he had to get out of here. David Knight says, with Philip Riley, Chance Tucker, and Ryan Barnes getting passed by Morrison and Mickey, what does that say to them? Work harder or your time here has come and gone. And I think what it says to them is, look, we're going to play the best guys. And right now, those guys are the best guys. And if you want to play, you've got to work harder, improve in areas you got to improve upon, is what I think that means. I mean, I've heard good things about Chance Tucker. I think I've heard that Mike Mickens likes Chance Tucker and Ryan Barnes a lot. I think Philip Riley's just a little bit more further behind from a development standpoint, just from an instinctual thing. I think he struggles, but this is more about just how good Benjamin Morrison and Jaden Mickey have been. The other thing too is Ryan Barnes was out for a little bit of fall camp, and when you've got good players around, you can't afford to miss time because you're going to get passed up. But I think it just says, hey, look, we're going to play the best guys. And so they're going to play the younger guys. If you prove to be better, we'll play you. Let's see here. Matt Lee, this is a good question, Matt. Is the Tennessee game really an upset if Bama loses? Because I'm personally not really impressed with Bama defense after seeing them play the Aggies. Yeah, we talked about that earlier, and your question came in before we talked about that, I believe. But look, it's an upset in every sense of the word. It is, and no, I'm not been impressed with Alabama in several ways. However, Bama's still ranked higher. Bama's still the more proven team. Tennessee, I'm actually going to look up. It's been a while since Tennessee has beaten Alabama. So let me just look up when the last time was that Tennessee beat Alabama. It's been a while since they've beaten them. Yeah, the last time Tennessee beat Alabama. Now, keep in mind, they have played every single season since this time, but the last time that Tennessee beat Alabama was 2006. Alabama's beaten them every year. Bama's favored, higher ranked, and the more proven team. So even if Bryce Young doesn't play, if Tennessee beats them, it's an upset in every traditional sense of the word. I think what I would say to your point, Matt, however, is I wouldn't be shocked by it. And I'm predicting it to happen. So I do think that they'll I predict them to win. If Bryce doesn't play, I think if Bryce Young doesn't play, it makes it less of a upset to me. But even with me predicting Tennessee to win, I still view it as an upset at this point in time. It's going to be it's not a shocking upset. It's still an upset, and they got to go prove it. But I think it's not. So let's get to a couple. I think we're going to have to get out of here because I got some stuff that's kind of come up that I got to get to, and then Ryan had to run to get some personal stuff. But great show today. Look, tomorrow, listen to me. Tomorrow, if you're in town, if you live in town, or if you're in town for the game, be on campus, be over near the Golden Dome around 3 to 3:15. I'm going to be around there. We're going to be getting set up. We're going to go live from campus tomorrow for a show, a special edition show. It won't be a super long show. It's going to be a very important show. It's going to be one you're going to want to, even if you can, to be in person for. Would love to see you all there. I'll be there, obviously. And some other special guests will be there tomorrow. So you're definitely going to want to check that out tomorrow on campus, 3 to 3:15 over by the Dome. You'll see me. I'll have a table there. We'll be all set up. It's going to be a blast. Definitely looking forward to it very, very much. Hit that like button, everybody. Hit that subscribe button. Hit the notification bell. Share this podcast. If you're listening via podcast, please give us a 5-star review. We would appreciate that very, very much. Tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. Also, we are having our IB Countdown to Kickoff game, our kickoff show with Vince and Sean. Ryan will also make an appearance to talk about the important recruits that are going to be on campus tomorrow. Saturday after the game, it'll be a late show, but we will have a post-game show after the game tomorrow. And then, of course, Sunday, Vince and I will be back for our Upon Further review. So I hope to see a lot of you out on campus tomorrow. Definitely going to want to come check that out. It will be on YouTube. It will be a live show. So if you're not in town, it's going to be a live show, meaning we're going to stream it live from there. So it still will be a live show. So it'll be on air because Ryan will be part of it. Ryan won't be at the game tomorrow. I will be on campus. Ryan is going to be doing the show from his place, so we will be able to get that done. But yeah, so even if you're not there, you'll still be able to watch the show and enjoy everything as well. So I think Mark Brown said it best. Go Irish. Thanks everybody for joining us on the Irish Breakdown podcast.